Hey guys, tonight we drift back into a time when the hills of Wales echoed not just with sheep bleats and bardic tunes, but also with heated arguments over cheese. Picture this. You're standing in a little stone cottage, perched on a damp slope, where the hearth always smells faintly of warm milk and wood smoke. Your boots are muddy, your cloak is damp, and you're clutching a wheel of hard-earned goat cheese like your life depends on it. Because, well, it might. You see, in medieval Wales, cheese wasn't just food, it was identity. It was politics. It was frankly a reason to call the local magistrate. And if you got caught nicking a neighbor's cheddar, you wouldn't just be branded a thief. You'd trigger a full-on legal process that could result in fines, land seizure, or a public shaming that would haunt your family name for generations. Honestly, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. It's always lovely seeing where you're all tuning in from across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're trudging through the bracken-covered hills just as dusk settles over the landscape like a sheep's woolen blanket. You've been summoned to a small meeting of the village elders. Your crime? Technically, it's not your crime. But your cousin has been accused of stealing a cheese, again. And in this valley, that's not just petty theft, that's a judicial catastrophe. The accused cheese in question? A fresh, bloomy wheel of ewe's milk, belonging to Marion, a particularly stern dairy farmer with a penchant for weighing everything, including compliments. Your cousin swears he only touched the cheese to move it from the cart when it rolled loose. Marion insists otherwise, and so, like so many ridiculous disputes in this oddly litigious time, it's going to court. By court, of course, we mean the stone table behind the tavern where three bearded elders sit and interpret the laws of Hywel Dda, a king from the 10th century whose law code, among other gems, includes several clauses on dairy crimes. Yes, it's that specific. You think modern tax code is boring? Try memorizing the difference between curd theft and clabber deception. The village square is already abuzz with gossip. Did your cousin do it? Is Marion just looking to cause trouble because he lost a wager last week? Someone swears they saw a small piece of rind near the footpath. Evidence, perhaps, or just snack debris. You pretend not to care, but you're also not taking chances. You wear your good tunic. You even wash your hands. Because if they decide you're somehow involved, you might be fined 2 cows and a third of your barley stock. That's enough to ruin your winter. Now, as you sit on a wobbly bench and listen to one of the elders clear his throat for the 4th time in a row, you start to reflect on just how wild it is that people in this village fear cheese law more than bandits. But it makes a sleepy kind of sense. Cheese was vital. It kept. It traveled, it fed you when nothing else would. And if someone tampered with it, that was survival sabotage. A dog saunters past the court circle, sniffs the air, and trots off toward the tavern. Everyone watches it, perhaps looking for omens, or perhaps just wishing they could follow. Instead, you're here, listening as the elder reads from a tattered vellum scroll that smells suspiciously like goat hide. His voice drones in a cadence that somehow makes you both want to nap and also worry that you're about to be fined for looking drowsy. The scroll reads, "If a man take of another man's cheese without leave, and it be proved, he shall pay 1 pound of silver if the cheese be cow-made, 2 if it be ewe, and 3 if it be of goat, such as the goats of the western hills, which are known to yield sweeter milk." You glance at your cousin. He looks pale. And you? You're suddenly wondering why goat cheese is considered so criminally fancy. But before you can ask, the elder slams down a ceremonial wooden spoon. Yes, that's the gavel here, and announces the court is in session. The trial begins. Marion stands, clutching the moldy cloth he claims once wrapped the cheese. Your cousin tries to mount a defense based on location, intent, and something about a squirrel, but he's not exactly eloquent. You try not to smirk. Historians still argue whether this kind of trial was meant more to preserve order or simply to reinforce local hierarchies through elaborate rituals, but whatever the purpose, it works. Everyone listens, takes notes, and treats this entire process with the solemnity of a coronation. The elder leans forward, peers at the cloth, sniffs it, and says, "It is indeed goat." Gasps ripple through the crowd. You feel your winter barley slipping away. The verdict will come soon, but for now, all you can do is sit, wait, and contemplate how you ended up in the most cheese-focused drama of your life. The verdict is in. You're standing in a stiff half-circle with your cousin beside you, wringing his cap so furiously it's starting to resemble over-kneaded bread dough. The village elder leans over the stone bench, squinting at the cheesecloth, as if it might confess on its own. After what feels like an hour of deliberation, he speaks in that gravel pit voice of his. Given the evidence, the accused shall owe Marion 2 cured hams and 1 iron cauldron, value equal to the cheese in question, and compensation for the distress caused. Relief washes over you. That's steep, yes, but at least your cousin's not being sent to herd goats in the swampy hills for a year, which was one possible punishment floated earlier. And Marion looks smug enough to last him a full fortnight. But it does leave you wondering, why was cheese taken so seriously? Why not bread or eggs? Why did medieval Welsh law decide to micromanage curds? You walk home slowly that night, lantern in hand, boots squelching through damp grass, and that's when it hits you. Cheese wasn't just a snack in these hills. It was a currency. In a world with no banks and few coins, cheese could buy favors, settle debts, pay a dowry. A hard-aged wheel of goat cheese could last for months, grow more valuable with time, and even serve as collateral for renting pasture land. In fact, there are records, yes, real ones, of villagers storing cheese wheels in earthen crocks as long-term investments. It wasn't uncommon for someone to say, "I'll take 2 wheels of aged ewe and a side of smoked pork in exchange for an ox cart." One mainstream historical fact. Hywel-Dda's 10th century law code lists cheese alongside grain and livestock as acceptable forms of compensation for injury or insult. Yes, if someone knocked your tooth out, you might get paid in cheese. It sounds funny until you realize that toothaches were a lifelong affliction and cheese was actual relief, not to mention nourishment. But it wasn't all standardized. The type of cheese made all the difference. Curdled sheep milk formed into soft rounds was considered more elite, especially if it came from well-fed animals on highland pastures. Cow milk cheese was more common, thus less valuable. Goat cheese, oddly enough, was viewed as both rare and risky. Goats required hilly terrain and didn't always play nice with enclosed farming systems. So, a sharp cheddar-like cow cheese might get you a bag of oats, while a soft, spreadable sheep's cheese could earn you lodging for a week. That strange economic logic extended to punishments too. Steal a wedge of common dairy, maybe a few lashes or a fine. But take a full wheel of aged goat cheese, especially one marked with someone's family rune. That was felony territory. Quirky tidbit, some Welsh villages kept official cheese weights and measuring spoons made from carved wood, stored in the town's communal chest. These objects were occasionally blessed by the local priest to ensure fairness during trades. One village in the north even had a cheese scale shaped like a sheep's head, complete with painted eyes that supposedly rolled if you tried to cheat the weight. Sleepy superstition. Maybe, but no one dared mess with the scale. Now imagine yourself as a trader arriving with a donkey laden with cheese. You'd have to check in with the steward, declare your goods, have each cheese weighed, and, in some cases, offer a small wedge to the local judge as a gesture of goodwill. Yes, judicial brie, perfectly normal. And if you think that's excessive, wait till you hear how cheese played into inheritance law. It was common for a dying villager to will specific wheels of cheese to certain relatives, particularly if they were from a favored season or herd. One recorded dispute from the 13th century involved a brother and sister fighting over a wheel of spring ewe cheese that had been aged in mountain caves. They both claimed their late father promised it to them. The village court ruled in favor of the sister, but only after a taste test confirmed the cheese had the distinctive flavor of Highland thyme. Historians still argue whether the cheese economy created real equity or just entrenched social divisions further. After all, those who owned more land had more animals, made more cheese, and thus held more sway in court and community. But it's also true that a clever peasant could rise in status through savvy dairy deals. Cheese was wealth, but also politics. As you finally trudge into your cottage that evening, you place your own wheel of cheese, one you've been aging carefully for months, on a wooden shelf beside the hearth. You feel a little proud. It's firm, golden-rinded, and smells faintly of warm grass and responsibility. You nibble a corner, savor the salt, the fat, the faint tang. Then you wrap it gently in linen and whisper, "Stay safe, my friend, because tomorrow you'll take it to market, and you'd rather not end up in court." The next morning dawns with the sound of bleating sheep and the distant clatter of a cartwheel over loose stones. You stretch, roll out from beneath your wool blanket, and take a moment to admire your cheese, still intact, still aging like a fine argument. Today is market day, and your plan is simple. Trade the cheese, get supplies, avoid all humans who might accuse you of dairy-related misconduct. The market square, when you arrive, is a sensory feast. Carts piled with rushes, fabrics, dried fish, and clay pots jostle for space between rude wooden stalls. Smoke wafts from a fire pit where someone's roasting chestnuts, and the nearby ale tent is already attracting men who've clearly decided the sun is high enough, regardless of actual hour. You settle in beside a woman selling beeswax candles and try to make your display inviting. A clean cloth, a wooden sign, a knife for samples. You are ready. But then, from behind the herb cart, you hear it. An argument. Loud, impassioned, and of course, about cheese. You crane your neck and spot two older villagers going red in the face over what appears to be a wedge of something white and crumbly. The accusation. One man claims his neighbor sold him cheese made from morning milk, which, according to him, is inferior to the richer evening variety. His voice rises to the kind of volume usually reserved for heresy trials or livestock stampedes. You can't help but be drawn in. Because you, dear listener, have learned something. In medieval Wales, not only what cheese you made mattered, but when you made it could be legal ammunition. Let's slow it down here. In pre-modern dairy practice, the time of milking affected the composition of the milk, fat content, flavor, yield. Morning milk, often lighter and thinner, was typically used for softer, quick cheeses. Evening milk, richer in butterfat after a day of grazing, made denser, more valued curds. Some cheesemakers mixed both batches, others kept them separate for particular recipes. Mainstream historical fact. Hywel Dda's law code makes note of the difference between early and late cheese and suggests that intentional deception, selling inferior cheese as high quality, could be punishable by forced public confession, restitution, or in rare cases, forfeiting one's market rights for a season. That's right. Banned from the cheese game, medieval cancel culture. Now here's your quirky tidbit. There was an informal, unwritten system called cos y bor and cos yar hwyr, morning and evening cheese. And some towns took it further, branding cheeses with rudimentary stamps or symbols to indicate timing and quality. In one Welsh village, it's believed that cheesemakers used pressed heather sprigs as temporary molds to imprint the curd, leaving behind a pattern that told buyers which herd and which time of day it came from. So yes, when the angry villager bellows that he's been duped with cos y bor when he paid for cos yar hwyr, this isn't idle nitpicking. It's cheese fraud, and everyone nearby turns to listen. You linger at the edge of the crowd as a constable appears, a wiry fellow in a badly dyed tunic, and begins his version of crowd control, which mostly involves clearing his throat and saying, "Now then," on repeat. The cheese is produced. A few brave souls are asked to taste it. The accused insists it was evening cheese. His wife backs him up, as does a teenage apprentice with a suspicious look in his eye. Historians still argue whether medieval cheese disputes reflect a broader legal consciousness or simply a community's need to formalize petty grievances. But either way, they loved their rules, and those rules didn't just shape cheese sales. They shaped when cows were milked, how pastures were rotated, and who had the right to graze where. Eventually, the constable declares there is insufficient proof of cheese fraud, but warns both men to avoid further dairy discord. The crowd disperses. You return to your stall, slightly amused and maybe a little more nervous about your own cheese. Not long after, a customer approaches, a plump, kind-eyed widow who eyes your offering thoughtfully. "Morning or evening?" she asks, with the shrewdness of someone who's bought one too many rubbery rounds in her day. You smile. "Evening. Fed on clover, finished with hay. A touch of smoke from the curing house." She tastes a slice, nods slowly, and hands over a cloth pouch of oats and a jar of pickled onions. You make the exchange, tuck your trade safely in your bag, and breathe a quiet sigh of victory. That evening, back in your cottage, you muse over the day, the arguments, the details, the sheer energy that goes into determining a cheese's pedigree. It's oddly soothing, predictable, like the shifting of the seasons or the creak of the door latch in a breeze. Tomorrow, you'll return to your chores, milk the cows, rotate the wheels. Maybe even try your hand at soft cheese, though it's risky without better storage. But for now, you settle into your straw mattress, hands still faintly scented with whey and thyme, and let the weight of centuries of cheese lore lull you to sleep. Sleep doesn't last long. Not in a cottage where the roof occasionally drips. The rooster confuses moonlight for dawn, and mice stage midnight heists beneath the floorboards. You wake early, stretch your sore limbs, and step outside into a cold mist that clings to everything like gossip. Today's task is a quiet one, organizing your cheese ledger. Yes, that's a real thing. Not all peasants kept books, of course. But among cheesemakers, especially in tightly knit Welsh communities, it wasn't unusual to mark down who made what, when, with which cow, and where the wheel was stored. Some used parchment, others a notched stick system, and a few, like you, used both, depending on whether you were worried about rain or rodents. You sit at your rough-hewn table, flip open your soft-bound ledger, and begin cataloguing. One cheese from Brangwen's cow, clover-fed, early morning milk, not for sale until summer. Another from Illyri's sheep, full moon batch, strong scent, good trade value. You pause, frown, and then scribble a quick note to taste it again before market. Cheese does strange things over time. As you're writing, your eyes drift to the fire, where your prized wheel is warming slightly, just enough to soften the edges for evening bread. You note its details too, proud of your work. But as you finish the line, you remember something you heard once, that there used to be an entire book, the Lost Cheese Book, kept by a traveling steward of Hywel Dda's legal counsel that contained every clause, footnote, and case study related to dairy crime in the realm. You chuckle. A cheese grimoire, probably just tavern talk, or maybe not. Mainstream historical fact. While there's no confirmed record of a cheese book per se, Hywel Dda's Cyfraith Hywel, his 10th century law code, contains extensive entries on dairy products. These laws were preserved and copied for centuries, often modified by scribes depending on region, which has led some scholars to speculate that traveling judges carried supplementary scrolls tailored to local customs, potentially including dairy-specific addenda. You finish your notes and step outside to chop wood. That's when you spot them. Two men trudging along the path, one in dark robes, the other leading a mule packed with scroll cases. Travelers. Rare, but not unheard of. They approach with weary eyes and polite nods, asking for shelter and food. In return, they offer tales and letters from nearby towns. You agree, lead them inside, and within the hour, you're all seated by the hearth, nibbling bread and cheese while steam rises from your guests' damp cloaks. The older one, a notary of some kind, eyes your ledger with interest. You keep detailed records, he says. Very Hywelian. You blink. You mean like the king? He nods. My uncle once worked with a steward who carried the second volume of the Cyfraith, the Lesser Laws. Cheese crimes, goat disputes, butter taxation. You almost drop your knife. He chuckles. Most of it's legend now, lost in mold, fire, or eaten by mice, no doubt. But they say there was once a ruling about a farmer who trained a squirrel to steal cheese from windowsills. That alone took 14 pages to litigate. Quirky tidbit? There is an old folk tale about a squirrel thief in Ceredigion passed down through generations. Some versions say it was a trained pet, others say it was a spirit in squirrel form sent to punish the greedy. Either way, the resolution always involves a trial, a cheese sniff test, and the squirrel mysteriously vanishing just before the verdict. Your mind reels. If this cheese book existed, even in fragments, it could contain everything. Old rulings, dispute precedents, maybe even the original definitions of when a cheese becomes property. You stare into the fire, picturing it. A faded leather-bound volume, stored in a monastery chest or buried in a bard's satchel, filled with cramped script and goat illustrations. You wonder if it's still out there. Maybe in an abbey library, misfiled under agricultural mysticism. Historians still argue whether supplementary legal texts like that were widely distributed or strictly oral. But given how much weight was placed on communal memory and local tradition, it's not out of the question that a few cheese-specific scrolls roamed the countryside, adjudicating the fate of moldy wheels. That night, as your guests snore gently on piles of hay, you stare at the ceiling and consider starting your own book of cheese law. At the very least, it might keep the mice out of your good parchment. In the morning, you'll give the notary a spare wheel of your finest and ask him to look out for any mention of the lost book in his travels. Who knows? Stranger things have happened in this valley. After all, you once saw a man try to bribe a priest with butter. A few weeks pass, and the notary is long gone, but the idea of the lost cheese book lingers in your mind like the scent of smoked curd on a linen sleeve. Life returns to its usual rhythm, milking at dawn, rotating cheeses in the cool pantry cellar, and avoiding Marion whenever possible. But you start to see things differently now. Every wheel, every crumb, every rind carries more weight than before. Not just nourishment, but legacy. One market day, you're seated on a log outside the ale tent, quietly savoring a hard crust of bread topped with last autumn's aged cheese, when a heated discussion breaks out at the stall next to you. You peek around a stack of baskets and realize, of course, it's yet another dairy dispute. This time it's not over when the cheese was made, but what kind it was. "I said it was a hard cheese," shouts a red-faced cheesemaker, jabbing a floury finger at the indignant buyer. "Pressed and cured." The buyer scowls. "Pressed? This? I could cut it with a spoon," the onlookers murmur. The tension rises. It's going to be that kind of day again. Here's the thing. In medieval Wales, the type of cheese wasn't just about taste. It dictated its value, its use, and importantly, its classification under law. Mainstream historical fact. Hyweldida's legal code, as it was preserved and interpreted over centuries, included legal distinctions between fresh cheeses, often eaten within days, soft cheeses, slightly aged but still pliable, and hard cheeses, pressed, cured, and often valuable enough to be used in trade or as legal compensation. Each type had different rules if stolen, spoiled, or misrepresented, and the penalties. Oh, they varied. Stealing soft cheese from someone's kitchen might earn you a fine of butter or barley, but impersonating a hard cheese, that could be tried as fraud, especially if the cheese was being used in a transaction like dowries or legal restitution. Imagine trying to pass off cottage cheese as currency. Scandalous. Quirky tidbit. In some Welsh regions, cheesemakers had signature rinds. Yes, decorative techniques using herbs, ash, cloth, or bark. These patterns could help identify the maker and verify the cheese's classification. Some even shaped the wheels differently. Squat rounds for soft cheese, tall cylinders for hard cheese, and curious domes for ceremonial batches that were offered to local lords. One village near the southern coast reportedly used pressed dandelions to leave a sunburst mark on their wheels, stamped with flora and legality. Now, here's where it gets stickier than oversalted curd. The definition of cheese itself wasn't consistent. Some farmers would curdle milk with fig sap, others with vinegar, rennet, or leftover whey. Some used mixed milk, goat and cow, or even sheep and mare, depending on local grazing. And naturally, every family insisted their method was the right one. You sit back on your log and consider this open scholarly debate. What really counted as cheese in medieval Wales? Historians still argue whether fig-cured curd was recognized by law or dismissed as foreign fluff. Some manuscripts refer to it as mock cheese. Others imply it was revered as sacred food by traveling monks. Back at the market, the dispute is still unresolved. The accused cheesemaker offers to slice open the wheel and let the village elder taste it. A dangerous move, but bold. The elder, bless him, accepts. He cuts, sniffs, tastes, and then pronounces. This is a soft, lightly pressed cheese, a good one, but it is not the hard cheese you claimed. The buyer demands half his payment returned. The cheesemaker grudgingly complies. Justice, like cheese, must be balanced. You smile to yourself, take another bite of your bread, and wonder how many such disputes have passed through this village over the centuries. You also make a mental note to label your own cheeses more clearly next time. As you walk home later that day, you pass by a neighbor's shed and spot something curious. Hanging from a nail by the door is a rough cheese wheel with herbs pressed into the rind in the shape of a fish. You pause, squint, and chuckle. That particular design? It's known in local legend as a court cheese, a batch made specifically to present as evidence in cheese trials. Apparently, you're not the only one thinking about legality these days. That evening, while stirring curds in a large copper pot, you decide to start experimenting with herbs and markings. Not just for flavor, but for signature. You'll press nettle into the top and fennel seeds into the sides. If anyone ever questions your cheese, you'll be ready. Identifiable, classifiable, and legally defensible. It's the medieval equivalent of notarizing your cheddar. You sleep that night with the scent of hot milk on your hands, soft hay under your spine, and dreams of wheels turning slowly in shadowed cellars. You wake to the sound of dripping water, not from a leak in the thatch this time, but from the slow, methodical drop of whey being separated from curd in the hanging cloth bundle near your window. It's a peaceful sound, the kind that makes you feel slightly proud, slightly hungry, and very aware of how much effort goes into turning milk into something the law might actually recognize. Because if there's one thing you've learned recently, it's that in medieval Wales, even measuring a cheese wasn't straightforward. Before it could be sold, served, or used as evidence in court, it had to be classified, valued, and, crucially, weighed. But how exactly did one weigh a cheese in a world with no standardized scales, no printed labels, and a high risk of local favoritism? You open the pantry door, where your own wheels rest in dim coolness like small stone planets in orbit. Some are squat and heavy, others still soft, gently collapse under their own weight. You give one a careful prod. It jiggles, then settles. The idea that someone could legally accuse you of undercurding it crosses your mind. Again, mainstream historical fact. Cheese weighing in medieval Welsh markets wasn't done casually. Many villages had official scales, often kept by a steward or legal officer, and standardized wooden or iron weights to measure goods in punts, livres, or unions. These weights weren't just tools, they were symbols of community trust. Interfering with them could land you in serious trouble, like being barred from market, or worse, being declared a cheat of cheese. Some towns even appointed an official called the Poiser Cause, literally, the cheese weigher, whose entire job was to make sure no one fudged their dairy numbers. It might sound silly, but when a single wheel could equal a week's wages, that role was as serious as a tax collector. and arguably more feared. You remember a story you once heard at the tavern, a cheesemaker accused of using hollowed weights filled with pebbles to falsify his measures. He was brought before the village court, and after a public demonstration and a lot of sighing, the court fined him 12 loaves of bread, 3 jars of honey, and ordered him to sit in the stocks with a sign that read, "I skim and scheme." You're still not sure whether the rhyme was a coincidence or a bardic flourish. Quirky tidbit. Some weights used in Welsh markets were carved with tiny symbols, crosses, spirals, or even initials to signify ownership and authenticity. One rare surviving weight discovered near Carmarthen was made of polished river stone, carefully carved to resemble a curled sheep. The implication? This weight was used exclusively for cheese and wool trades. Historians still argue whether the sheep shape was symbolic, superstitious, or simply a craftsman showing off. Back in your cottage, you begin preparing your own wheel for the next market. You brush off mold, wipe the rind clean with a vinegar-soaked cloth, and wrap it in a piece of waxed linen. Then comes the moment of truth. You place it on your balancing scale. It dips slightly to the left, then settles, just under 5 pounds. You jot the number down in your ledger, adding a small notation. Highland clover fed. Late spring batch, faint citrus on the nose. Just as you're tying the cloth, you hear a knock at the door. It's Aled, your neighbor's apprentice, holding what looks like a bundle of wool, but turns out to be a cheese. "It's from Marion," Aled mutters, clearly uncomfortable. He says this is proof you've been using his rennet method. You blink. "His rennet method?" Aled shrugs. "He says the cheese smells like his grandmother's cellar." You suppress a sigh, thank the boy, and close the door. Another day, another cheese accusation. Historians still argue whether cases like this were more about real legal concern or just socially sanctioned rivalry. The law did provide detailed guidance on compensation, intent, and process, but it also gave villagers a framework to turn every minor offense into a performance. Legal theater, cheese drama. The emotional range of a court dispute could swing from philosophical to farcical in a single sentence. You decide to go on the offensive. That afternoon, you bring your wheel, clean, labeled, weight verified, to the local steward's table and request a certification. It's an old process, rarely used these days, but the steward obliges. He checks your figures, examines the wheel, nods approvingly, and presses a small wax seal into the cloth. There. Your cheese is now officially recognized by the court. You smile all the way home, imagining Miriam's reaction when he sees the seal. You may not have invented your own rennet, but you've certainly mastered the art of medieval cheese bureaucracy. That evening, with the fire glowing and your prized cheese safely stored, you pour a mug of warmed mead and settle into your creaky wooden chair. Through the window, you can hear the faint bleating of sheep and the low rustle of grass in the breeze. You sip, savor, and exhale. Your cheese is real, your measurements are accurate, and for one sleepy evening, the dairy law is squarely on your side. The breeze this morning carries a sharper bite, a hint that the season is beginning its slow shift into summer. You step outside and stretch your arms, already bracing for what you know is coming. Because today is court day again, and this time you're not a witness or a defendant. You've been asked to serve on the cheese tribunal. Yes, that's a thing. In your village, like many across medieval Wales, rotating community tribunals were the way disputes were settled, particularly when it came to land use, livestock, and you guessed it, cheese. The theory was simple. Locals knew the people, the customs, and the cows. They'd be fair, or at least fairish. And if someone was truly outrageous, well, they'd be remembered for it long. After winter. You arrive just after midday to the usual spot, a stone bench beside the river where 3 chairs have been dragged into place, and one nervous scribe is unrolling parchment that keeps curling in the wind. The disputants are already there. Bryn, a proud cheesemaker with arms like tree trunks and patience like melting butter, and Anwen, a sharp-eyed widow who once bartered a cartload of onions for a single wheel of goat cheese and made it sound like a favor. The issue? Ownership of a cheese wheel allegedly left in a communal cave for aging. Bryn says it's his. Anwen says she left it there 6 weeks earlier and even carved her initials into the rind. Naturally, the cheese is now rindless. Someone, possibly a mouse, possibly a cousin, shaved the outer shell completely. Mainstream historical fact? Communal cheese aging spaces were common in some parts of Wales, especially in regions with natural caves or cool, damp cellars, ideal for slow curing. Locals would store wheels on designated shelves, often marked with family symbols, herbal wraps, or wax colors. The law technically treated these spaces as neutral, but disputes were frequent. So frequent that certain districts had dedicated keepers of the cave, whose job was to monitor inventory and resolve mold-based conflicts. You examine the disputed cheese carefully. It's firm, cow's milk based, with a light greenish bloom on the surface, probably nettle-aged. Anwen swears it smells like her thyme, which she says she feeds to her cows. Bryn says his cheese always develops that aroma in the cave's east alcove. You're not convinced either way. And then someone suggests the old trick, the wait and weigh test. Quirky tidbit. This little-known local method involved soaking a thin slice of the cheese in warm whey and measuring how quickly it softened. Allegedly, each herd's milk caused curd to react differently, and an experienced elder could taste the source. It's wildly unscientific and frankly highly imaginative, but respected. So you try it. You slice a piece, soak it, and offer it to old Madeline, the village herbalist and part-time cheese whisperer. She sniffs, chews, smacks her lips thoughtfully and declares, "This is the cow that wandered into the rye field last Lammas." "That's Bryn's cow," Anwen fumes. Bryn beams. The tribunal quietly votes. Cheese returned to Bryn. No fine for Anwen, but she loses shelf priority in the cave for 3 weeks. Historians still argue whether these folk methods carried actual legal weight or if they were more performative rituals to keep the peace. Likely both. The goal wasn't always truth. It was harmony. As long as both sides felt heard and the cheese was respected, the village could move on. After the tribunal disbands, you hang back and chat with Madeline. She tells you about older times, when disputes like this weren't settled by tests but by feasting. "We used to gather both families, eat the cheese together, and declare the one who sliced it best the rightful owner," she says with a wink. Nobody ever lost on purpose. But they didn't ruin friendships over a wheel, either. You like that idea. Less fuss, more cheese. But you also know that in a world where food is wealth, and wealth is survival, even small things matter. On your walk home, you pass a young boy carrying a small wheel balanced carefully on a wooden plate. He tells you proudly it's his first. You ask what kind it is, and he replies, "The safe kind. I carved my initials with a spoon and hid it behind the bean sacks." You nod. Smart kid. That night, you light a tallow candle and update your ledger. Served on tribunal. Verdict in favor of Bryn. Weight test semi-convincing. Madeline still has it. You lean back, rubbing your eyes, and wonder what other ancient cheese methods have been lost to time. Fermentation chants? Salt blessings? Did someone once try to divine guilt from the bubbles in a whey pot? Maybe one day you'll write your own cheese code, not just laws, but traditions, a kind of sleepy declaration of dairy sanity. For now, you sip warm milk and let the flicker of the candle blur into a puddle of golden light. The cheese is always watching, but tonight it smiles. Market day again, and the air is buzzing with flies, gossip, and the unmistakable aroma of overripe brie left in the sun a little too long. You set up your stall early, this time next to the barrel maker who swears up and down that his barrels are now cheese-proof. You don't ask what that means. You simply smile, nod, and arrange your goods. You're halfway through slicing sample wedges when Daffod the Miller comes storming across the square, red in the face and waving a cloth bundle like it's a war banner. "She's done it again," he yells, pointing toward his wife, Rhiannon, who is calmly sipping cider by the fire pit. You blink. "Done what, exactly?" "She took my cheese from the pantry. Said it was her share, but that was the parade cheese." "Ah." Parade cheese, of course. Mainstream historical fact. In some medieval Welsh villages, ceremonial cheeses were made for festivals, parades, or important feasts. These wheels weren't ordinary. They were often larger, flavored with special herbs, and sometimes decorated with pressed flowers, carved patterns, or even inlaid nuts. Losing or accidentally eating a parade cheese could bring considerable shame. One recorded case from a border village involved a man being fined 2 lambs for slicing into the village's blessing cheese before midsummer. Daffod insists Rhiannon knew what she was doing. Rhiannon maintains that if it's in her pantry, it's fair game. She also adds, with an eyebrow arched high enough to touch the gods, that if Daffod didn't want it eaten, he should have labeled it more clearly. You're not involved in the dispute officially, but you're invested now. Everyone is. The market has paused, and people have formed a loose circle around the arguing couple. Children peek between barrels. One of the bards starts tuning his lute. That's when someone suggests the cheese footprint test. Quirky tidbit? In especially theatrical villages, a unique custom involved placing the disputed cheese under the foot of the accused, usually wrapped in cloth, to see if their weight caused the rind to split. Supposedly, only the true owner's foot would harmonize with the cheese and leave it intact. Utter nonsense, of course, but no one wanted to pass up the drama. Rhiannon agrees, mostly because she's had just enough cider and wants to prove a point. Daffod wraps the surviving wedge in linen and places it on the market bench. Rhiannon steps up, places her foot gently on the cloth, and nothing. A collective gasp. The rind holds, no cracks, no splits. Rhiannon throws her arms up in triumph. "The cheese is mine!" Daffod turns an alarming shade of maroon and storms off, muttering about salt content and betrayal. The bard immediately starts composing a song on the spot, rhyming cheese with peace and fleece with decease. It doesn't entirely scan, but no one cares. Historians still argue whether such customs were legal rituals, symbolic performances, or simply community-sanctioned excuses for a bit of levity. Most likely, it was all three. In small, tightly woven villages, resolving disputes through theatrics rather than actual punishment helped preserve social harmony. You return to your stall, amused, and sell 2 wheels within the hour. People love drama, but they also love dairy. The mood is light again. A man in a straw hat offers you a trade, a wheel of his smoked sheep's cheese for a slab of your nettle-aged cow round. You agree, mostly because he threw in a pouch of dried plums. Later that afternoon, you find yourself reflecting on the importance of ceremony in the life of cheese. It wasn't just nourishment, it was ritual, celebration, identity. Even in disagreements, cheese brought people together. Sometimes to shout, sometimes to laugh, sometimes to watch a grown woman stomp on a wheel in front of the butcher. Back home, you sit with your notebook and begin jotting down an idea for your own village festival. The first curd parade. You imagine decorated carts filled with wheels wrapped in flowers, a cheese-tasting contest, and maybe even a blessing of the salt by the local steward. You add a footnote: no stomping contests unless approved by the tribunal. Outside, the sun is dipping low. The scent of clover hangs in the air. A dog barks in the distance, and somewhere, a wheel of parade cheese is being carefully guarded by someone who's learned their lesson. You light a candle, Unwrap your traded cheese and take a small, reverent bite. It's sharp, grassy, and just salty enough to make your eyes close in appreciation. Cheese doesn't forget, you think. And neither do the people who take it too seriously. The sun peeks in through a crack in your wooden shutters the next morning, illuminating motes of dust and the dangling, half-woven herb bundles hanging from the rafters. You rise slowly, feeling the pleasant ache of market work and community judgment still lingering in your limbs. Today, there are no festivals, no tribunals, no parades. Just chores, the quiet kind. You start with your shelves, turning, wiping, sniffing, noting. Each cheese has its own temperament, like a living thing with moods, needs, and small grudges. You rotate the heavier wheels, flip the softer rounds, and gently scrape the rind off one particularly moody goat cheese that's decided to bloom in every shade of the mossy spectrum. As you work, your mind drifts back to a conversation you overheard weeks ago. Cheese forgives nothing. Especially theft. You're not entirely sure what that means, but it haunts you in a cozy way. Later that day, a knock on your door. It's Mard, the steward's niece and unofficial town investigator, when things go mysteriously missing. She holds a small pouch in one hand and a crumpled note in the other. "It happened again," she says flatly, walking inside before you can say a word. She sets the pouch on your table and opens it. Inside, a sad, crumbling lump of cheese rind. You raise an eyebrow. Stolen? Half a wheel. From the baker's cellar. They were saving it for the christening feast. She lays down the note. It's scrawled in uneven handwriting. "Forgive me. It smelled too good. I'll repay you in turnips." You both stare at it for a moment. Mainstream historical fact. Cheese theft was so common in some parts of Wales that specific legal clauses were written for it, especially theft from communal stores, feasting halls, and religious houses. Punishments ranged from mild compensation to full public apology rituals. In some cases, the thief was required to walk through the village holding the remains of the cheese, followed by a bell ringer who announced the offense. It was less about shaming and more about ritual cleansing, curing the wedge, so to speak. You examine the rind. It's waxed, slightly singed on one edge, and bears a faint pattern of pressed rosemary sprigs, exactly the baker's signature. You nod. "I'll go sniff around," you offer, grabbing your cloak. Mard doesn't laugh. She's seen you solve cheese mysteries before. You start at the tavern. The boy sweeping the floor tells you someone smelled like rosemary last night. You check the fire pit, no cheese in the ashes. You check behind the ale casks, no rind wrappers. Then, at the chicken pen behind the cooper's house, you find it, a wooden board, dusted with crumbs, and a half-eaten heel of cheese tucked in the straw. A chicken clucks in protest. Guilty? Probably not. But nearby, muddy footprints lead to the apprentice's shed. You find Elfin, the cooper's son, napping in the straw, smelling faintly of rosemary and shame. You don't wake him. Instead, you leave the note at his side, with a wedge of your own cheese and one line scribbled on the back. "If you're going to steal, at least cut it properly." You return to your cottage, hand the note to Marad, and make tea. Quirky tidbit? In some border villages, young cheese thieves were forgiven if they could cut a perfect wedge from a remaining wheel, one that balanced in thickness, angle, and weight. It was believed that only the truly remorseful could cut without cracking. The phrase, "cut true, sins through," was whispered often enough to become a proverb. Probably nonsense, but comforting nonsense. Historians still argue whether the forgiveness rituals in cheese law were a form of restorative justice or just dairy-driven superstition. But whatever their purpose, they offered a way forward. Nobody wanted a world where a child starved for stealing curds. And besides, everyone had taken a secret bite at least once. That night, You write your own note, not for anyone else to read, but for the quiet pleasure of it. Today's cheeses: one truth, one lie, one lesson. You place it beside your newest round, a sheep's milk blend flavored with caraway and thyme, and wrap it in cloth. As the fire burns low and the wind picks up outside, you wonder what cheese you'd be remembered for. What flavor? What shape? What scent? You smile. Maybe rosemary and turnips. The village feels quieter than usual today, the way it often does just before something goes wildly, hilariously wrong. You can smell it in the air, part cow, part clover, part impending farce. And right on cue, just as you're hanging your soft cheeses to drain over the back stoop, a runner appears at your gate, panting and red-faced. "Quick," she gasps. "You're needed at the tavern. It's an emergency." Now, you've lived here long enough to know that emergency, in village terms, usually means something like the cider ran out, or two uncles are arguing over who invented soup. But this turns out to be new. You arrive at the tavern to find 4 men and 2 women in a standoff over a wooden plate. On it, a wedge of cheese. Half-eaten, crumb-specked, surrounded by empty cups and righteous indignation. The issue, as it's explained with the intensity of a courtroom drama, is this. Someone has misidentified the cheese served with yesterday's supper. A guest claimed it was an aged ewe's milk wheel from the valley. The cook insists it was her personal blend: cow, goat, a pinch of sheep, aged in linen and nettle. The mix-up has insulted the cook, disgraced the guest, and ignited a local argument over cheese identity. Mainstream historical fact: in medieval Wales, identifying the origin of a cheese wasn't just a matter of pride. It could be essential for trade, law, and even inheritance. A cheese's pedigree, when verified, could affect everything from its sale value to its acceptability at feast tables or in religious offerings. Many cheesemakers used herbal wrappers, wax seals, or bark molds to create distinctive imprints that could verify a wheel's origin. In this case, the cheese was unlabeled, unwrapped, and rapidly devoured with onions and ale, leaving behind only crusty remnants and bruised egos. You're asked, semi-formally, to weigh in. You approach the wedge. It's creamy, pale yellow, dotted with the tiniest air pockets. You press a finger to the edge. It yields. You sniff. Definitely goat in the mix. And thyme. Possibly clover. You clear your throat. This, you say, is not the Valley Ewe cheese. It's a house blend, likely from a local cow, finished with goat's milk and aged in a linen wrap. The floral notes suggest either thyme or clover, possibly both. Judging by the aroma and the spread, I'd wager 6 weeks old, give or take. The tavern falls silent. Even the fire crackles more softly. The cook beams. The guest looks horrified. A slow round of applause builds from the back, starting with Madeline the herbalist, who nods as if to say, "Well done, cheese oracle, quirky tidbit." There's an old folk belief in the northern valleys that certain people are born with the Lygad cause, the cheese eye, a sensory gift that lets them identify any cheese with a glance or a sniff. These people, often bakers or brewers by trade, were respected and sometimes feared. Legend holds that one such cheese seer correctly predicted a wedding, a theft, and a famine, all based on how a wheel of soft goat cheese split when sliced. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or just well-trained noses paired with social intuition. But across Wales, the idea of the cheese whisperer persists, someone who could taste a town's secrets from the rind alone. You don't have the Lygad cause. Probably, but you've spent enough time with curds and molds and mild court cases to recognize flavor patterns. And after today, well, your status is unofficially upgraded. Later, back at home, you find a loaf of oat bread left on your doorstep, wrapped in cloth and marked with a thank you stone. Beside it, a sliver of cheese, firm, nutty, clearly cow-based. A gift, perhaps, or a peace offering from the cook. You sit on your stoop, slice the bread, and pair it with the cheese. It's lovely. The kind of flavor that starts earthy, then turns mellow and sweet, like forgiveness over time. You pull your notebook close and write, "Cheese may lie, but if you listen, it always confesses eventually." The sky turns gold as evening creeps in. Far off, the bards begin tuning their lutes for the night's songs, and the scent of roasting onions wafts through the breeze. You lean back, full and satisfied. You've solved a cheese mystery, avoided another feud, and discovered a new favorite flavor. Sometimes justice is soft, spreadable, and a little nutty. Your morning begins with a knock, a grunt, and a suspiciously loud clattering of hooves. You open your door to find Iestin, the village's most dramatic shepherd, leading not one but 2 goats onto your property. "They're yours," he announces. "Compensation." You blink at him. "For what?" "For the cheese," he huffs, as if this explains everything. "The cheese from the northern slope herd." "The one that vanished?" "Ah, that cheese. Mainstream historical fact." In many Welsh villages, herders and dairy makers entered into informal verbal agreements, what we'd now call handshake deals. If a cheesemaker's product was compromised due to a shepherd's negligence, whether the milk was tainted, spoiled, or liberated by livestock gone rogue, there were expected forms of restitution: goat's milk, a helping of wool, or in this case, actual goats. Property law was deeply entangled with livestock responsibility. You rub your temple. The Northern Slope herd cheese was a joint effort. Milk supplied by Eston, processed by you, and intended for the steward's summer table. Only, it never finished aging. Somewhere between the brining and the binding, the wheel disappeared. You'd assumed mice, or maybe Madeline's cat. But now Ieston is certain the fault lies with his herd. He believes a particularly ornery nanny goat broke into your curing hut and kicked the cheese into oblivion. The proof: a smear of whey on her left hoof. Circumstantial at best, but at least he's making it right. The goats stare at you blankly. One sneezes. Quirky tidbit? Goats in medieval Wales were often scapegoated, literally and figuratively, for all sorts of culinary misfortunes. There's a recorded 14th century dispute from Powys involving a missing buttercrock. The culprit? Allegedly a goat who eyed it with intent. The villagers called it the Eye of Malice case and resolved it with a new rule. Goats were to be kept out of curing spaces and, if caught near cheese, had to be tethered, facing away from the product for 1 week. Petty, absolutely. Effective. Dubious. Easton leaves you with the goats and a curt nod. You now own them. Congratulations, you're no longer just a cheesemaker. You're a herder, apparently. You name one Mobley and the other Sion, mostly because yelling, "Hey goat," stopped working around the 2nd hour. Historians still argue whether these livestock for cheese exchanges were binding under written law or merely socially enforced. Hywel Dda's code has entries for livestock compensation, but it's unclear how far that extended into dairy-specific disputes. What's more likely is that communities operated on reputation and rhythm. Nobody wanted to be the fool who let a cheese crime go unpaid. By midday, you've fashioned a modest goat pen out of repurposed fence slats and stacked stones. The goats seem unimpressed. One tries to chew your sleeve. The other tries to climb your log pile. You attempt to milk Mobley. She objects. Loudly, with her head. This is going to take some time. Still, there's something satisfying about adding goat's milk to your daily supply again. You haven't used it in a while. Your last few attempts were too sour or too grainy, but with the right herbs and timing, you could attempt that mellow Alpine-style cheese you once read about in a passing merchant's recipe scroll. You remember crushed juniper, honey salt, low smoke, a calming cheese, a bedtime cheese. That night, you stand in the doorway watching the goats settle under the eaves. The stars are starting to prick the sky, and the low bleat of contented animals hums in your ears like a lullaby. Inside, your curd pot is already warming. A soft, milky steam rising into the rafters. You jot a few lines in your ledger. Acquired goats via dairy dispute. Test batch tomorrow. Suspect sabotage, but compensation accepted. Smelled faint thyme on Mobley's beard. You chuckle to yourself. Maybe goats aren't the worst neighbors. The fire crackles. A new cheese awaits. You curl up under your wool blanket and close your eyes. Goat dreams tonight. Hopefully peaceful ones. You awaken to the unmistakable sound of hooves on wood. That's never a good sign indoors. Scrambling out of bed and into your boots, you swing open the pantry door. And there she is, seeing the goat, triumphant, smug, and somehow standing on top of your cheese shelf like she's queen of Dairy Mountain. Several wheels are knocked askew, and one has plummeted to the floor, landing with a soft thud and a little tragic crumble around the edges. Out, you whisper, voice still hoarse with sleep. Out right now. She stares at you. Then she starts chewing a corner of the curtain. Eventually, you coax her back outside with a fistful of hay and a promise that if she survives the week, she'll be painted in bardic verse as she who fell from the shelf yet remained smug. You repair the damage, noting which cheeses need flipping, which ones are salvageable, and which, regrettably, must be sacrificed to the pig. But the morning's chaos reminds you of something else. Where a cheese falls matters almost as much as how it falls. Mainstream historical fact? In many parts of medieval Wales, the location of a cheese was legally relevant. If a cheese was stored in a communal curing cave, it was considered under neutral trust. If it was in a home pantry, it was private property. But if it was found in a disputed boundary area, say the ledge between two cottages or a shared root cellar, it could trigger a gwerth fored or value assessment to determine compensation or division. Today, unfortunately, you've got one such situation brewing. Madeline, the herbalist, appears at your door just as you're wiping goat prints off your ledger. She's holding a small wrapped parcel in one hand and a raised eyebrow in the other. "This was under the boundary eaves," she says, placing it on your table. "My shelf ends where the stone juts. Yours begins where the rain hits, or so I thought." You unwrap it carefully. It's a small, firm wheel wrapped in dried nettle leaves and dusted with ash. "Not your work, but close." Madeline watches you. "So?" she asks. You sniff it. Familiar, but not yours. Probably one of Eluned's batches. She cures in ash, uses nettle, and wraps tightly with twine. You say as much. Madeline sighs. Then what's it doing under our eaves? Ah, the eternal question. Cheese migration, quirky tidbit. There were regional laws in medieval Wales regarding Trosglwyd widow cause. Literally, cheese transfer. These applied mostly to situations where wheels moved without consent, either through mislabeling, accidental swapping, or occasionally rolling off shelves during storms and being found by other villagers. Some towns even established a cheese tax. If you found someone else's cheese and reported it, you could keep a portion as a finder's fee, usually a slice or wedge. Historians still argue whether these cheese movement laws were consistently enforced or just a byproduct of communities with too much time and not enough locks. You and Madeline agree to return the cheese to Eluned, but you walk it over together, half out of neighborly courtesy, half to witness how Eluned will react. She's not upset. She just nods and mutters something about the wind and mischievous squirrels, then insists you both stay for tea. The three of you sit under her garden trellis, sipping herb-infused whey tea and watching the goats in the pasture, which, thankfully, do not appear to be climbing anything this time. Conversation turns, as it always does, to cheese. Madeline mentions trying a new sage-infused curd. Eluned is experimenting with smoked applewood ash. You confess that Mobley's milk is better than expected, though she's a menace in the kitchen. "Ah," says Eluned, "the best milk always comes with a bit of rebellion." You all laugh, because it's true. As the sun begins to set and the sky stains itself with streaks of pink and amber, you rise and head home, carrying a gift from Eluned, a small wheel of smoked used cheese bound in moss cloth. You promise to return the favor soon. Back home, you place the gift carefully in your cellar, away from the reach of hoof and paw, and note it in your ledger, received from Elund, origin verified. Smells faintly of apples and sass. You write a second entry underneath. Cheese moved by wind, dispute settled with tea. No tribunal necessary. That night, as the goats snore softly in their pen, or at least shuffle around menacingly, you drift off to sleep with thoughts of shared wheels, drifting boundaries, and the quiet joy of solving a dispute without shouting or stomping. Cheese peace is real. And in your little corner of the world, it's preserved one slice at a time. You're woken the next morning not by goats, nor thunder, nor the usual rhythmic dripping from the eaves, but by a knock, a soft one, polite, even. Which frankly is suspicious. You shuffle to the door, half-dressed and still dream-sticky, and open it to reveal two monks in travel-worn robes, each holding a modest bundle and a scroll. They bow. "Peace and cheese be upon your household," the taller one intones solemnly. You blink. "Pardon?" "We've come," the shorter one adds, "in search of a particular cheese, and possibly a fragment of the law that governs it. And just like that, your day is no longer yours." Mainstream historical fact. Monasteries across medieval Wales were not only centers of prayer but also of food production, especially cheese. Monks developed some of the more sophisticated aging and flavoring techniques of the era, using herbs from cloister gardens, cool stone cellars, and precise record-keeping. Their cheeses were often gifted to nobles, traded for manuscripts, or sent as offerings to other religious houses. These monks, however, aren't here to give you a gift. They're here on a quest. They unfurl a scroll and show you a faded drawing, a wheel, cross-sectioned, with what appears to be a pattern of cloves pressed into the rind. The margins are covered with cramped Latin and curious annotations in Old Welsh. The cheese is labeled simply Cos y Gwirioned, the cheese of truth. You invite them in, offer tea, and ask for details. According to them, this cheese was made only once a year in a specific monastery near the coast, using milk from cows fed on sea thistle and ash leaves. It was said to clear the tongue, meaning it compelled honesty in whomever ate it. Naturally, it was used in arbitration and legal proceedings. Quirky tidbit. One Welsh legal manuscript contains a curious passage about truth wheels given to witnesses before testimony. While there's debate over whether this was symbolic or actual food preparation, the description matches the monk's drawing almost exactly. Cheeses prepared with pungent herbs, smoked lightly, and aged with cloves may have been used to focus the mind, or simply to leave the mouth too dry for lying. You stroke your chin, thinking, that pattern, you have seen something like it. Not long ago, during a barn clean-out, you came across a broken clay mold with clove-sized indentations in a radiating sunburst. You had no idea what it was. You still don't. But it's out back, under a pile of plow handles. You bring it in. The monks gasp like you've just pulled a holy relic from under your chicken coop. They inspect it reverently, running their fingers along the cracked edge. The taller monk nods, misty-eyed. This is the dish. The mold, the shape of justice. You're not sure about all that, but you do feel a small thrill. Maybe your goats did kick something important into the light. The monks ask if you'd be willing to try recreating the cheese with them. As an experiment, they say, to test its powers. And to preserve a forgotten taste. You agree, because frankly, who wouldn't want to attempt cheese divination with two monks in a questionable mold? You spend the next 3 days gathering ingredients. Sea thistle, which is not, as it turns out, easy to find inland, dried ash leaves, smoked clove dust, and a delicate balance of goat and cow milk. The monks help stir, chant, and record every step. You've never had such polite humming assistance before. Historians still argue whether these so-called truth cheeses had any real psychological effect, or whether their strong, oddly medicinal flavors simply startled people into blurting out confessions. One theory even posits that the smoke and herbs acted like mild stimulants, clearing the sinuses, waking the mind, and opening the tongue. Whatever the truth, you and your monkish companions mold your wheel, wrap it in linen, and place it in the coolest corner of your cellar. It will take a few weeks to cure. In the meantime, the monks stay in your guest cot, helping milk the goats, singing psalms while stirring curds, and generally being the most well-mannered cheese roommates you've ever known. Before bed, you note it all down. Attempted recreation of cause y gwirioned, mold discovered beneath shovel pile. Outcome uncertain, monks confident, goat skeptical. You fall asleep to the soft chant of a traveling hymn and the gentle rhythmic sound of a monk whisking whey in the moonlight. And you dream, oddly enough, of a courtroom where everyone tells the truth, one tiny bite at a time. A fortnight passes, and the cheese ripens. The monks, who now move through your cottage like shy, reverent ghosts, declare it's ready. You descend into your cellar, lantern in hand, and the moment the warm, waxy scent hits your nose, you know something is different. The wheel, pale gold with a light ash-gray rind, is dense, perfectly formed, and smells like clove, thyme, and something curiously sharp. Not sour, not spoiled, just alert. You set it on the table like a relic. The monks gather close, one holding the original scroll, the other humming under his breath. You reach for your best knife. The moment the blade sinks into the rind, a spicy tang lifts into the air. The monks inhale deeply, eyes wide. The wedge lifts cleanly. The crumb is fine, almost creamy. It shimmers faintly under the lantern light, like it's been dusted with truth itself. Now, says the taller monk, we test. Naturally, this calls for a volunteer. And naturally, all eyes turn to you. You take a small bite. It's intense. First, a saltiness, then heat from the clove, then an almost floral bitterness that settles in your sinuses and makes your scalp tingle. It's not unpleasant, but it's certainly not bedtime cheese. More like confess every secret you've ever kept cheese. You set down your knife. The monks lean forward. Well, one asks. Do you feel truth? You blink, then say very quietly, I once told Marion his cheese was fine. It was not. It was grainy and underaged and tasted faintly of beeswax and despair. The monks gasp. Then the shorter one snatches a piece and bites. I switched Father Owain's cheese tithe with mine, he blurts. His was better. I resented it. The taller monk follows suit. I told the abbot I didn't like nettle cheese. I love nettle cheese. I dream about it. You all stare at each other, then burst into laughter. Mainstream historical fact? Confessional rituals involving food were not uncommon across medieval Europe, and Wales had its own peculiar traditions. Some religious communities practiced a form of culinary reflection, eating specific herbs, roots, or symbolic foods, while meditating or praying, believing the flavors might unclog the soul or bring hidden thoughts to the surface. Clove, sage, and sea thistle were all used for such purposes, sometimes ground into pastes or infusions, but occasionally, according to one marginal monk's note, in cheese. You're not sure if this is spiritual enlightenment or just strong seasoning, but either way, the wheel has earned a name. You mark it in your ledger, cause y gwirioned, cheese of truth. Provokes confessions, possibly indigestion, unfit for casual eating. The monks take a generous portion for their abbey, swearing to keep the recipe alive. You send them off with 2 wheels, some goat cheese for travel, and a polite note for the abbot. Consume in moderation, preferably near a trustworthy scribe. Quirky tidbit? There's an old bardic story about a cheese so truthful it ended a feud between 2 villages after the chieftains confessed they both preferred beer to mead. The bard ends the tale with a proverb, let the wheel roll true and the tongue follow after. You can't help but think you've tasted something very much like that. Later, you test it again on your neighbor Eola, a woman notorious for borrowing things that never quite make their way back. She accepts a small slice, chews thoughtfully, and after a long pause says, I may still have your butter churn. You nod. I figured. She hands it back the next day, freshly washed, filled with a batch of sweetened cream and a note that says simply, "Delicious cheese." Let me know when it's safe to eat again. Historians still argue whether these truth-inducing cheeses ever actually existed, or whether tales like yours were just morality-flavored folklore. But here, in your sleepy village tucked between hills and hedgerows, the cheese of truth is very real. That evening, as the goats doze under the stars and the last of the whey drains into the soil, you write one more note in your book. Confessions accepted. Churn returned, peace achieved. Never feed truth cheese to the bard. Because yes, you did. And yes, he's now composing an 8-verse ballad about the time you wept over a sheep. You blow out your candle, tuck yourself into bed, and let the cool night air drift across your skin. No lies left to carry, only cheese. It's been a peaceful few days, eerily peaceful. No new accusations, no cheese gone missing, no goats invading the pantry. You almost begin to suspect the universe is buttering you up for something. And, as if on cue, it delivers. You're heading to the well with a bucket when you hear shouting from the hilltop pasture. Shouting, followed by laughter. Then more shouting, and a very specific phrase yelled across the valley. Put down the cheese and step away from the cart. You break into a brisk walk. As you crest the hill, you find a familiar scene, though somehow worse. A crowd gathered around 2 men, both red-faced, both gesturing wildly, arguing over what you now recognize as your old cheese cart, the rickety one you traded away last year for a goat that never liked you. On the cart, 4 large wheels of cheese, all labeled. All suspect. The argument? Ownership. And more bizarrely, origin. "This one," bellows the first man, jabbing a stubby finger, "came from my cow, I swear it. Look at the stamp." The second man rolls his eyes. "That's my heather pattern. Your cow eats turnips. This smells like clover and pride." You exhale slowly. Not again. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval Welsh cheesemakers used all sorts of visual identifiers to mark their wares. Pressed herbs, bark wraps, stitched initials into cloth coverings, even carved patterns into soft rinds before curing. But as trade expanded between villages, confusion and duplication became inevitable. Some towns developed unofficial cheese registries, kept by local stewards or abbots to prevent fraud and resolve duplication disputes. You approach the cart and examine the wheels. Sure enough, one has a spiral of rosemary pressed into the rind. Another sports a crisscross ash pattern. A third has no markings at all, just a faint salty bloom that smells of goat and rain. Neither man has proper documentation, naturally. You suggest the tried and true method, the taste-off. Each man selects a wedge from the disputed wheels, offers it to a panel of 3 tasters, yourself included, and waits for judgment. It's the village's most democratic process. You eat, you discuss, and you declare. First wheel. A bit dry, faintly bitter. Cow's milk, likely from the lowland pastures. Second wheel. Soft, floral, goat's milk, nettle-wrapped. Definitely not from a turnip-fed cow. Third wheel, exceptional, rich, smoky, layered with flavor. Someone actually knew what they were doing. You make your decision. The second wheel belongs to the second man. The first wheel? Hard to say. Possibly misaged. Possibly just bad. But the third? That one no one recognizes. Not even the men arguing, which leads to a new mystery. Who made this cheese? Quirky tidbit. In parts of Western Wales, there were tales of the night curdler, a mythical figure or anonymous cheesemaker who left unlabeled wheels at festivals or on doorsteps. Some claimed it was a monk in hiding, others a widow with no heirs. The cheese was always exquisite, but its origin was never proven. In one case, the wheel was declared property of the community, sliced into exactly 32 parts, and distributed to every household with strict instructions. Do not season, do not question. The villagers agree the mystery cheese must be tested further, by which they mean eaten thoroughly and repeatedly. The bard is summoned. Someone sets out bread, someone else brings cider, and just like that, the hill becomes a picnic. You recline in the grass, nibbling a piece of the smoky wedge, letting its flavors unfold slowly across your tongue. There's thyme, definitely. Maybe a hint of caramelized onion. A back note of hay and something faintly wild, possibly juniper, possibly magic. Historians still argue whether anonymous cheeses like these were intentional art, accidents, or the result of stolen milk gone surprisingly right. But most agree, when a cheese is this good, origin becomes secondary to appreciation. You pack a slice to take home, along with a mental note. Never underestimate the power of a well-aged mystery. That evening, as the sun dips below the hedgerows and your goats settle noisily into their corner, you write in your ledger, "Attended dispute, solved identity of 2 cheeses." Third remains a mystery. Suspect divine intervention or experimental monk. You add a final line, smiling to yourself. Name the third, cause ir neb, cheese of no one. You place the wedge carefully on a small dish, light a candle beside it, and sip your evening milk with reverence. It's not always about who made it. Sometimes it's about who enjoys it best, and tonight that's you. The morning is fog-wrapped and damp, the kind that clings to your tunic and curls the edges of your parchment. You're sitting at your little writing table, updating your cheese ledger while sipping something hot and mildly herbal, when someone bangs on the door hard enough to rattle your hanging garlic strings. You open it, expecting goats. Instead, you find Ossian, the village scribe, always breathless, always slightly stained with ink, and he's holding what appears to be an official writ tied in red ribbon. "You've been summoned," he says, in the tone of someone who isn't quite sure whether to be impressed or alarmed, "to the High Moot at Lanhiddle." You stare at him. "The High Moot? That's real?" "It is this year," he shrugs. "And you're the dairy representative." You sigh. Deeply. The High Moot is one of those things everyone talks about as if it happens all the time. In reality, it's a once-a-decade event, a gathering of stewards, judges, bards, and tradefolk from a dozen villages convene to settle major disputes, update customary law, and, yes, eat prodigious amounts of cheese. It's the closest medieval Wales gets to a Supreme Court crossed with a potluck. Mainstream historical fact? Periodic assemblies or moots were vital to medieval governance, particularly in decentralized areas like Wales. These gatherings served legal, administrative, and social purposes. Some lasted a day, others an entire week. The Welsh term for this was Cyfarfod Mor, literally great meeting. And yes, trade representatives, including cheesemakers, were occasionally invited to testify, especially when trade law or food purity was on the docket. So you pack your things, your finest cheese samples, your freshest ledger, your emergency nettle wrap, and one of the good goats, the one least likely to chew someone's shoes. You spend 2 days crossing hills and streams, dodging rain and grumpy herders, until you arrive at Lanhiddle, a village bigger than yours, with stone buildings and actual signposts. You feel underdressed and oversmelled. The moot is held in the central hall, a tall beamed structure with benches, banners, and an odd number of ceremonial spoons mounted on the wall. You're ushered to your seat between a barley merchant and a man who sells pig bristles for paintbrushes. He smells of vinegar. You try not to judge. Then the session begins. They open, of course, with music, a bardic retelling of the tale of the cheese that ended a war. It involves an exploding wheel, a mistaken hostage, and a suspiciously accurate goat. You're not sure how much is true, but the chorus slaps. Then come the cases. First, a dispute between 2 abbeys over a misdelivered salt shipment that spoiled an entire season's cheese. Second, a proposed limit on foreign rennet, which has caused unruly textures and moral softness. Third, your turn. You're called up to answer questions about labeling. Specifically, whether herbs count as identifiers, and if so, what happens when two cheesemakers use the same herbs. Quirky tidbit: some Welsh legal texts include guidelines for marking property with plant-based signatures, bundles of rosemary on fences, ash twigs tied to grain sacks, even clover pressed into wax seals. These customs bled into food, where herb use became as much a signature as a flavoring tool. You testify calmly, offering slices of your signature cheeses, passing around your pressed fennel wheel and your caraway-laced sheep's cheese. The steward tastes, nods, then says, "But what if someone copies your herbs?" You pause, then reply, "Then the truth lies in the cut." You demonstrate. Your cheese slices clean, firm, holds its shape. A copycat's batch, you explain, often fails at that moment. The herbs may match, but the integrity, the slice logic, does not. Historians still argue whether such criteria were ever formalized. But the idea of truth in texture recurs in Welsh food lore. If the cheese cuts true, it is true. A kind of edible oath. Your reasoning wins the room. They draft a resolution. Cheesemakers must press a secondary mark, a pattern or letter, into the opposite edge of the wheel. Herbs alone are no longer enough. You're thanked, applauded, lightly, and gifted a small medallion of official recognition. It's shaped like a wedge. Of course, you spend the night in the Moot House's guest quarters, curled beneath a scratchy wool blanket, with your medallion in one hand and a half-nibbled victory cheese in the other. You note the day in your ledger, testified at the High Moot. Policy change enacted, medallion slightly heavy, cheese well received. Goat behaved poorly. Outside, Llanhiddle is quiet, except for the muffled sound of bardic revelry. Something about a love triangle involving a cheesemaker, a shepherd, and a very persuasive badger. You decide not to ask. You drift to sleep smiling, the scent of clove and thyme lingering in your nose, the glow of the Moot Hall lanterns flickering in your dreams. Justice was served. Alongside very good cheese, you return home a minor celebrity, not the kind that gets songs sung about them, though the bard in Llanhiddle did promise to work on a piece titled The Cutter of Truth, but the kind of fame that earns you respectful nods in the marketplace and suspiciously generous offers of oatcakes in trade. Even Miriam grunts a begrudging well done as you pass, though he immediately follows it with, "Still wouldn't use goat milk." Too enthusiastic. You resume your routine with quiet satisfaction, milking, turning, tasting, flipping wheels, and logging temperatures on your cellar slate. But peace, as always, is short-lived in the dairy world, because that evening, Madeline arrives with a warning and a loaf of something suspiciously sour. "The shepherds," she says, setting the bread on your table like it might explode, "are hiding cheese." You raise an eyebrow. "Hiding?" She nods. They've been spotted tucking wrapped wheels into the high glens beyond the common pastures. Not bringing them to market, not even curing them properly, hoarding them. You chew on that, mentally, not the bread, and consider the implications. Mainstream historical fact. In isolated Welsh communities, especially those perched near highland pastures, shepherds sometimes made quick cheeses from excess milk, usually soft, sour, and intended for immediate family use. But in certain periods, especially during regional shortages or feasting seasons, these makeshift cheeses became valuable. Hoarding them, or avoiding tithes, was technically illegal. There are surviving records of secret wheels being discovered behind stone walls wrapped in moss or bark, buried beneath sheep pens. The most famous case: a shepherd named Llwyd, who was fined a dozen eggs and a month of public chores for hoarding 20 wheels of wild cheese in a hillside crevice. When asked why, he reportedly said, "I like them quiet and mine." You decide to investigate. The next morning, you pack a satchel with 2 tasting knives, a wedge of peace-offering cheddar, and a small notebook labeled "Suspected Hoards." You take the long path toward the hills, passing over familiar stone walls and under blooming gorse. The air is thick with birdsong and damp wool. By midday, you find the shepherds, 4 of them, seated in a circle on flattened heather, eating something pale and crumbly from a shared cloth. When they spot you, there's a pause, then a bit of shuffling, then one of them sighs. "We knew you'd come." You sit, politely. You offer the cheddar. They pass it around. Conversation begins. Turns out, yes, they've been hoarding cheese, but not for profit, for safety. The recent spate of goat-related chaos, mystery cheese appearances, and truth-telling wheels has left them wary. They've been producing soft rounds in secret, aging them quickly in the cool glens, and sharing only with trusted kin. They call it cause cud, the hidden cheese. Quirky tidbit. That term does appear in a few scattered bardic verses, often associated with hidden strength or quiet wealth. Some songs suggest the cheese was used in secret hand-fastings, a promise sealed not with rings, but with a shared bite from a hidden wheel. Romantic, if slightly pungent. You ask to try a sample. They oblige. The cheese is tart, fresh, wrapped in dock leaves and speckled with wild mint. It's not refined, but it's heartfelt. It tastes like wind and grass and something unsaid. You lean back and ask gently, "Would you consider sharing it?" Not hiding it? They exchange glances. One shrugs. Another mutters about townfolk ruining everything. A third says, "Maybe." If it's honored, not priced, that's fair. You propose a compromise, a secret cheese circle. Once a month, invite only, tastings held at neutral sites. No money, no judgment, just wheels and words. They think it over. Then nod. Historians still argue whether such informal gatherings ever happened, or whether they were simply whispered legends among cheesemakers. But you've always believed in the quiet corners of history, the ones sealed in wax and nettle and shared beneath moonlight. You return home late, slightly windburned, carrying a wrapped bundle of cause cud. You place it on your shelf, unmarked, but unforgettable. In your ledger, you write, "Discovered hidden cheeses in Upper Glen." Flavor, bold. Politics, delicate. New alliance forming. That night, as your goats rustle quietly and the air smells of distant mint, you fall asleep thinking about secret flavors, silent agreements, and the quiet power of a shared wheel. Some truths aren't shouted in the marketplace. Some are whispered between bites, up in the hills, far from the noise, and those, perhaps, are the richest of all. Morning dew clings thickly to the grass as you step outside, satchel slung across your shoulder, bound once again for the glens. Today is the first meeting of the secret cheese circle, an idea that started as a joke and has quickly morphed into a full-fledged, slightly rebellious movement. You've chosen a sheltered grove nestled between 2 mossy boulders and marked the spot with a small pile of sheep dung, which in local custom translates to, "Please proceed, but only if you know what you're doing." The shepherds arrive in pairs, each bearing cloth-wrapped bundles and long stories. They don't trust easily, but they trust the cheese. Each member of the circle places their offering on a flat stone in the center, like a weirdly dairy-focused druid ritual. Wheels, wedges, smeared rounds in bark, none of them labeled, but all of them deliberate. Some are laced with wild thyme, others with sea salt from the western cliffs. One soft, shaggy wheel even arrives covered in crushed walnut shell, which everyone agrees is bold, but frankly, difficult to slice. You go first. You present your newest goat-cow blend, aged with smoked fennel and marigold petals. It's soft, aromatic, a little flirtatious. You call it Cause Isbrid, ghost cheese. The name gets approving grunts and one polite chuckle. Tasting begins. Mainstream historical fact. Welsh cheesemaking wasn't always commercial. It was deeply social. Community gatherings centered around harvests, festivals, and yes, even cheese-tasting circles of a sort. Some scholars believe that before formal courts handled disputes, early cheese circles acted as informal arbitration panels. Your status in the group might rest on your curd game, and an excellent cheese could smooth tensions better than any speech. One shepherd's cheese has the bracing sharpness of raw garlic and sorrow. It is powerful. Everyone coughs politely. Another's is so mild it barely registers as cheese at all, more whisper than word. But the last, brought by a quiet woman named Linos, is extraordinary. It's small, wrapped in violet leaves, and infused with something no one can place. The flavor is delicate and layered, like morning fog over honeycomb. It silences the grove. People nod slowly, solemnly. You ask Linos what she used. She shrugs. Left the milk in a warm bowl, forgot about it. Found it a week later and added dried rose hips. The circle nods with reverence. Accidental genius is the highest form of creation. Quirky tidbit. In some regions, forgotten or found cheese was believed to carry spiritual qualities. There's an old rhyme, "Blessed be the curd that curdles unseen, for it holds the dreams of the kitchen." Monks often recorded recipes that began with "when the bowl was left untended." Supposedly, these cheeses were richer, stranger, and occasionally thought to offer prophetic dreams. You sample Linos's again. It tastes like a memory you forgot you had. After the tasting, the group discusses trade etiquette. Rules are simple: no gossip, no gold, and no bardic ballads about your recipes. Just trust. Wheels can be exchanged, tasted, or stored in the shared stone crevice marked by a twisted hawthorn. If anything goes missing, it's settled with a tasting vote. Whoever made the better cheese gets the benefit of the doubt. Historians still argue whether such exchanges were ever codified or whether this kind of oral agreement structure was common practice. Some say these informal pacts were the backbone of pre-modern rural economy, especially among craftspeople. Others call it folklore flavored with wishful thinking. Either way, your circle agrees to meet every full moon. Just long enough to avoid suspicion, just short enough to stay delicious. As the group begins packing up, you linger with Linos. You ask if she'd consider aging the rose-hip cheese longer, just to see what happens. She grins. "Only if you help me milk my aunt's goat." The one with the attitude. You agree, mostly because it feels like the kind of barter your ancestors would approve of. That evening, you return home with a bag full of traded cheese, one goat scratch on your arm, and a head full of possibilities. You write in your ledger, "Cheese circle convened." Ghost cheese well received. Rose-hip recipe potentially prophetic. New rules established. No bards allowed. Unanimous vote. As the moon rises full and bright over the hills, you sit by your window, nibble a sliver of Linos's offering, and feel the strange peace that only comes from knowing you're part of something quiet, gentle, and slightly rebellious. The world doesn't always need more rules. Sometimes it just needs more cheese. The next few weeks pass in a buttery blur. Between tending to your goats, rotating wheels in the cellar, and preparing for the next moonlit cheese circle, you hardly notice the days rolling by, until you wake one morning and realize something odd. Your best cheese wheel is gone. Not traded. Not tasted, not given away as a peace offering or used to settle a minor grudge. Gone. You check the cellar, you check the pantry, you even check the goat pen, just in case one of the girls has developed an impressive ability to drag dairy uphill with her teeth. But there's no sign of the wheel, only an empty cloth and a faint, mocking scent of thyme and fennel. Someone has stolen it. Mainstream historical fact: cheese theft in medieval Wales was no laughing matter. The Cyfraith Hywel lists several specific fines for stealing cheese, varying based on where it was stored, its condition, and whether it had been salted. Salted cheese, because of its preservability and trade value, was treated more like currency than food. Steal it, expect to pay in livestock, labor, or public shame. And this wheel, your ghost cheese, was salted, aged, marked with your signature herb crust. More importantly, it was meant for the next cheese circle. You're furious. And also, if you're honest, kind of flattered. Someone thought it was worth stealing. You take a breath and begin the quiet process of cheese-based investigation. You start by scanning the edges of your cottage for bite marks, footprints, or stray herbs. Nothing. You ask Marion. He denies everything but smirks in a way that makes you want to throw curds. You consult Madeline, who recommends a divination ritual involving dandelion wine and the breath of a goat, but you pass. Then you remember the one place no one ever checks, the abandoned root cellar near the old chapel. It takes you most of the afternoon to get there, through hedges, past ruined stone walls, across a suspiciously muddy ditch, but eventually you reach the half-sunken door, wedged with moss and a century's worth of disinterest. You push it open. Inside, the air is damp, pungent, alive with the scent of mold and long-forgotten fermentation. And there, tucked behind a rotting barrel, sits your cheese. Half-eaten. There are teeth marks, not goat. Not mouse, human. And beside the cheese, wrapped in a torn scrap of wool, is a note. "Forgive me, I needed it. You're better than you know." No signature. No clue, just a confession, quirky tidbit. In some Welsh villages, it was tradition to leave anonymous offerings after a theft had been silently forgiven, herbs, honey, or a song left on the doorstep. In extreme cases, a returning thief would leave behind an apology cheese, usually smaller, saltier, and intentionally underaged as a symbol of guilt. One bard recorded a tale where a stolen cheese returned threefold, carried by a goat with a ribbon in her beard. Probably nonsense, but a hopeful kind. You carry the half-eaten wheel home. Not for punishment, for principle. You cut away the chewed bits, trim the rind, and rewrap what's left. You decide to bring it to the next cheese circle, not as a sample, but as a story. When the group gathers under the full moon, you place the remnant on the central stone and tell your tale. They listen in silence. Then, one by one, each member breaks off a piece of what remains. No one jokes. No one accuses. It is perhaps the purest act of forgiveness the cheese circle has ever managed. Later that night, Linos hands you a small bundle. Inside is a wheel. Not stolen, not borrowed, but gifted. Her latest blend, juniper, honey, and sea salt. For next time, she says, in case you get robbed again. You laugh. And maybe cry a little, but only into your sleeve. You return home with a lighter heart and a note in your ledger. Ghost cheese stolen. Partially returned. Consumed in circle. No hard feelings. Suspect admiration. And then, lesson? Good cheese will always disappear. The best kind finds its way back. As you drift off to sleep, the faint scent of salt and forgiveness lingering in your room, you dream of wheels rolling over mossy hills, finding lost hands, returning home. Cheese, after all, is a little like truth. It doesn't always stay where you leave it. But it's hard to keep buried forever. The next morning, your dreams still clinging to your ribs like softened rind, you find something waiting on your doorstep. A bundle of clover, tied with twine, and nestled inside it, a single wedge of cheese. Firm, well-aged. Slightly nutty, with a hint of honey. It's not yours. You bring it inside, slice off a sliver, and taste. It's excellent, subtle, precise. Not flashy. The kind of cheese made by someone who knows their milk and knows patience. There's no note, no mark, no herb signature, nothing to identify the maker. Just a wedge, a quiet, edible thank you. You sit down slowly and whisper to yourself, well, looks like we've got a new player, mainstream historical fact. Medieval Wales had a tradition of anonymous offerings, not just in church pews or at seasonal festivals, but among tradespeople too. Bakers, brewers, and cheesemakers would sometimes leave gifts in doorways or on tools as signs of respect, competition, or apology. Some believed these gifts carried luck. Others saw them as silent challenges. Among cheesemakers, a good anonymous offering wasn't just tasty, it was a call to arms. You label the cheese in your ledger as wedge unknown, wrap the remaining half in waxed cloth, and place it carefully on your top shelf. Not for sale. Not for trade. This one's a riddle. Over the next week, you start to notice little things. Someone leaves a smear of ash near your cellar door. Just a pinch, exactly the kind used in aging hard sheep cheeses. A twig snapped into a precise V left on your chopping board. A small wooden disc, no bigger than a coin, scratched faintly with a spiral pattern, tucked between your herb bundles. Linos notices too. Someone's playing, she says when you show her the disc, and they're good. It's not threatening. It's playful, it's skilled, it's a game. Quirky tidbit. In parts of Gwynedd, there were legends of the cheese walker, a figure who roamed between villages leaving signs of judgment, symbols, samples, and sometimes riddles carved into bark or cheese rinds. No one ever claimed the title, and some thought it was simply a convenient excuse for anonymous flattery. But the symbol of the spiral was often associated with the cheese walker, meant to represent the layers of flavor, time, and story. You find yourself invigorated. For the first time in weeks, you try a new recipe: goat's milk with crushed hazelnuts, wrapped in cabbage leaves, aged in a barley sack near the hearth. You wouldn't have done it before, but now you're trying to impress someone you might never meet. You leave a slice of your new cheese on your own doorstep. Just a wedge, nothing more. It's gone by morning, and in its place, a smear of herb paste on a flat rock. Oregano, chive. Lemon balm, perfectly blended. Historians still argue whether such silent exchanges were a form of culinary correspondence or simply coincidence wrapped in romanticism. But among cheesemakers, the idea of dueling through flavor has always lingered. Your cheese answers mine. Your wedge challenges my wheel. Soon, you begin marking your offerings with initials carved into bark. Not your name, but symbols. A spiral, a slice, a wedge and dot. The other player responds in kind. It becomes routine. Every few days, a gift, a reply, a message written in texture and time. You never see the person, not a shadow, not a footprint. But you know them by flavor. Their work is consistent, elegant, curious, slightly melancholic. Theirs is cheese that wants to be understood. Yours, you suspect, tastes like stubbornness and nettle. One night you stay up past midnight just to catch a glimpse. You sit by the window, lantern low, a slice of cheese in your hand and a notebook on your lap. The stars blink, the goats sigh, time passes. And just when you're about to doze off, you see a shape, cloaked, quiet. Swift, a hand reaches up to place something by your gate, then disappears into the hedges quicker than any goat you've known. You wait until the footsteps fade, then rise slowly, heart thudding like an overfull churn. The gift is simple, a narrow wheel, banded in bark, wrapped in beeswax-soaked cloth. You take it inside, unwrap it with care, slice a thin edge. It's astonishing, earthy, dreamy. Soft-spoken, like a lullaby in cheese form, you smile. Not because you've won, but because now you get to reply. In your ledger you write, "The cheese walker lives." Their flavor is shadow and soil and old memory. I leave them a wheel of nettled defiance in return. That night you fall asleep with a plan already forming. You'll need lavender and pear, and a spoonful of cider vinegar. You're not sure what it will become. But you're not just making cheese anymore, you're writing love letters. In mold. You rise early the next morning, before the goats stir, before the dew has even thought about lifting, already knowing what you'll make. You gather your supplies carefully, milk still warm from Mabli, your steadiest goat, dried lavender from Madeline's herb satchel, borrowed, bartered, and thoroughly sniffed. Slices of dried pear, candied in honey weeks ago when the fruit was bursting off the branch, and just a touch of cider vinegar, aged in your own cellar, sour and proud. You work slowly. reverently. This cheese isn't just a recipe, it's a message. As you stir the curds, you find yourself muttering lines aloud, soft on the tongue, sharp on the finish. A dare, not a plea. Come taste me. You form the wheel in your smallest mold, pressing it gently but firmly. You wrap it in a cloth soaked in thyme water, then band it with strips of lemon bark. You mark it, not with your spiral, but with something new. 3 dots in a triangle, a challenge, mainstream historical fact. Some medieval cheesemakers in Wales used subtle coding systems in their rinds, pressing dots, cuts, or flower patterns to signify not just ownership, but intent. A wheel with a diagonal cross might mean it was made for court testimony. One with a petal burst could be for weddings. The triple dot triangle appears in one surviving scroll alongside the phrase, "This cheese is not meek." You leave your cheese by the gate just after sundown. No note, no fanfare, just the wheel, wrapped in cloth, resting on a clean slate. Then you wait and wait. 2 nights pass. 3. You begin to wonder if you've gone too far, if lavender and pear were too playful, if the vinegar sharpness was too much. You check your cellar compulsively, looking for another message, another wheel, anything. Then, on the 4th morning, it appears. Not at your doorstep this time, but tucked gently in the hollow of your stone wall, hidden behind a thistle like a secret meant only for you. It's a tiny cheese, no larger than your palm, covered in wax and stamped with something new, a perfect circle surrounded by 4 smaller dots. You sit with it. You study it, then you slice it. The flavor is quiet. Not bland, not shy, quiet. Like the first breath after rain, like moss, like grief. There's onion in there, and toasted oats, a whisper of pine smoke. You chew slowly, then look out at the hills, half expecting to see a silhouette watching, but the fields are empty, just wind and fence posts and sheep chewing with monumental disinterest. You return to your ledger and write, "They replied, a grief cheese, so soft it made my teeth ache." I think they lost someone. I think this is mourning, molded, quirky tidbit. Some bardic traditions held that cheeses could be offerings not just to people, but to memory. It's said that at certain midsummer feasts, villagers would leave wheels on hilltops overnight, hoping the flavors would absorb dreams or carry messages to the dead. Most wheels were eaten by badgers. A few were never found again. You decide your next cheese will be about longing. You gather sage, apple peel. You infuse the milk with a strand of hair from your mother's shawl. Clean, of course, but meaningful. You press the wheel into a mold lined with sheep parchment and weigh it with a smooth river stone. You leave no signature. Just a single pressed leaf from the hawthorn tree near your back gate, and when you place it outside, you hum a lullaby you haven't sung in years. They take it, of course. 2 days later, you find a pouch in return. 3 tiny wheels, each bound in flax string, stacked like a trilogy. One is bitter, one is sweet. One is empty, just a rind shell wrapped in rosemary. You laugh, you cry. You eat them slowly over 3 nights, letting the flavors linger, then fade. Historians still argue whether this kind of food lettering ever existed, whether tradespeople really corresponded across time and distance through edible notes. But you no longer need books to know it's true. You've felt it, you've tasted it. In your ledger, you write 3 replies. 1 goodbye, 1 echo, 1 question. You sharpen your knife. You heat your milk, you begin again. You may never know their name. You may never see their face, but you'll keep writing back, and your cheese will say, "I'm still here." You start leaving your window open at night, just a crack, enough to let in the scent of wild thyme and cool air, maybe a note carried on the wind. You pretend it's for ventilation, but really you're listening for footsteps, for whispers, for the sound of parchment crinkling beneath cheesecloth. You've entered into something now, Not just a trade or a game, but a kind of communion. Each wheel, each wedge, is a thought made solid. You wake wondering what message you'll send. You fall asleep wondering what they'll say next. But this morning, there's something different waiting. Not cheese, not herbs, not a flavor challenge. It's a map, drawn on vellum, neatly rolled and sealed with beeswax, pressed with the symbol you now know well, the full circle and the 4 dots. Inside, a single line of text. Come see where it began. Mainstream historical fact? Cartography in medieval Wales was as much art as science. Most maps were symbolic, lines and curves meant to represent relationships, not distances. A hill might mean a family, a tree might stand in for a place of judgment. Secret maps were often layered with meaning, trade routes, pilgrimage trails, or personal stories etched in code only the recipient could decipher. You study the path. It winds westward, toward the sea, curling through fields you know only from rumor, past the stone tree, over the whispering hollow, and finally, at its edge, a symbol that looks like a tower, or perhaps a kiln. You pack light, oat cakes, soft cheese, a knife, a chunk of wax-sealed nettle round, and a single square of your last reply, a cheese pressed with sage and grief. You wrap it in cloth and place it near your heart. It takes a day's walk to reach the stone tree. 2 more to cross the hollow. Along the way, you pass traces of old settlements, sheep pens long collapsed, hearthstones moss-choked, whispers of smoke from places where no smoke should be. You sleep beneath hedgerows. Eat quietly, dream often. On the 4th morning you arrive. At first glance, it's just a ruin, half a wall, a slope of overgrown bramble, a single arched frame jutting from the hillside like the last line of a forgotten poem. But then you see it. The kiln, or what's left of it, a great circular basin of stone, blackened in places, cracked in others. An old cheesemaker's kiln, built to cure under controlled heat, to smoke, to season in the gentlest way possible. This wasn't for mass production. This was for masterpieces, quirky tidbit. While cold cellars were the norm, a few rare Welsh cheesemakers experimented with warm curing, particularly for winter wheels. They built stone kilns with vented roofs, using soft smoke from applewood, heather, or gorse to age cheeses quickly but richly. Few of these survived. Most were destroyed during raids, floods, or time. But the tradition remains in bardic whispers. Near the kiln sits a flat stone slab, clean, dry, and dusted with ash, and on it a single cheese. Round, modest, wrapped in seaweed and tied with a ribbon of grass. You sit slowly, unwrapping it with trembling fingers. It smells like salt and smoke, like driftwood and fire. Like something impossibly old. You slice it. And as the flavor unfolds, sweet, then briny, then floral, you realize this is no longer just a message. This is history. You eat in silence, tears welling unexpectedly. You've never tasted anything like this. Then you see it, scratched into the inside of the seaweed wrap. A single phrase, "This was the first." You sit there for a long time. Eventually you unwrap your own offering. The sage and grief cheese. You place it on the slab. No note. Just that, a reply. You don't wait for them. This place feels like it belongs to the past, not the present. You return home slowly, following the same winding route. The goats are annoyed. The neighbors are nosy. Your cheese cellar smells slightly stronger than it should, but in your notebook you write, "I found it." The kiln, the root of it all. Their origin, or perhaps mine. Then another line. First cheese tasted like memory. I left mine behind. Historians still argue whether certain sites served as sacred spaces for tradecraft, hidden kilns, secret glens, moonlit groves, where only the initiated could go. Some scoff. Others insist the proof is in the silence. You believe now, not because of what you found, but because of what you felt. Cheese, it turns out, is more than milk and time. It is story, it is grief and joy and everything in between, curdled and cured, pressed and patient. And the best stories, you don't always get to finish them. You just leave your slice and walk away. When you return to your village, everything seems smaller. The fences, the hill paths, even your goats, though Sian still manages to look like she's judging your life choices, feel like echoes of a simpler version of things. You've just stood in a ruin older than the road to market and tasted something that lingered in your mouth longer than most conversations. But as always, the daily rhythm tugs you back. The cellar needs airing. The herb bundles need turning. You find 3 wheels starting to bloom with a blue that was never part of the plan and spend a full hour scraping, salvaging, and muttering insults at mold like it's a rival cheesemonger with a grudge, and then you hear it, a quiet knock. Not at the door, but at the window, your little shutter over the pantry shelf, left open now as habit. You peek through, expecting wind, or goat nose. Instead, you find a bundle, wrapped in clean cloth, marked with a spiral. Inside, a note and a cheese. The note reads, "You found it and left your mark. This is the last wheel I'll send, not because it ends, but because it's your turn now. The cheese is firm, small, and banded in bark. Pressed into the top, a hawthorn leaf. You don't eat it, not yet. You just sit with it on your kitchen table, the lamplight catching the fine cracks on the rind like veins of an old map. You turn the wheel in your hands, half expecting another message to materialize from the wax. Nothing. Only quiet, the hum of goats outside, the creak of the rafters. Mainstream historical fact: in bardic traditions, passing the last wheel to a student, peer, or rival was symbolic. It meant the exchange had reached its natural end, not in conflict but in transition. The last wheel wasn't an ending, but an inheritance. The unspoken instruction: continue the conversation in your own voice. You wrap the cheese again, place it on your highest shelf, beside your first ever wheel, slightly cracked, and your midwinter mistake, now used as a doorstop. You light a candle, set your knife beside your ledger, and begin writing. This is where my own story begins. The cheese of ash and honey, the first in a new round. That night, you work. You steep herbs you've never combined before, rosemary and mint with a touch of toasted fennel. You try a method from the ruin, warm, curing over applewood, slow and smoky. You press the curds into a shallow mold, shaped like the moon's first crescent. You don't sign it. But you do score a single slash across the base, your own mark, a new symbol, never used before. You don't leave it at your doorstep. You carry it. You travel 3 villages away, to a market where you once traded a wheel for a wool tunic and half a bag of salt. There, you speak with a young woman who's just begun curing cheeses in clay pots. She says her father was a fisherman. Her mother was a shepherd. She likes to use juniper and cider leaves. You smile. You pass her the wheel. She unwraps it. Sniffs, nods, doesn't ask questions. You leave it behind. Quirky tidbit. In some regions, it was believed that passing your cheese to someone outside your bloodline gave your recipes longevity. If the receiver altered the recipe, added a new herb, aged it in a different place, the spirit of the original cheese was said to live on, like yeast, changing but never dying. You walk home lighter. In your ledger you write, "Passed on the legacy." She smelled it and smiled. That's enough. And then just beneath it, no more ghost wheels, only new stories now. That night, you unwrap the final cheese, the one left with the note, and take a slice. It tastes like hearth smoke, like damp leaves, like the end of something. But not grief. Just pause, just hush, just space for something new. You fall asleep by the fire, the rind still warm in your hand, and somewhere far off, maybe another cheesemaker stirs her curds and wonders what you might send next. You find yourself watching the moon more now, not to time the cheese circle, not for weather signs, but because it feels like a companion, a silent witness to everything you've churned, wrapped, tasted, and passed along. The rhythm of life returns, but it hums differently. You still wake before dawn to milk the goats, still stir curds with your worn wooden paddle, still flip wheels on your stone shelves like turning pages in a book. But each movement feels more deliberate, more storied, like you're preserving something greater than food. And then comes the knock. Not a window tap, not a secret bundle, a real knock. Daytime, doorframe, followed by a voice. "Excuse me," the man says. "Are you the one who taught Linos how to smoke curds with rosemary?" You blink. "I suppose I am." He smiles. "She said you'd know what to do with this." He hands you a parcel, wrapped in cloth, warm. Inside, a cheese, new, raw. Full of potential, you lift it to your nose. It smells green. Young, unfinished, like a sentence waiting for a verb. And suddenly you realize what Linos has done. She's begun her own circle, mainstream historical fact. In medieval trade networks, especially among artisans, knowledge often spread through informal branches. A cloth pattern here, a brewing trick there, a cheese-making tweak passed from hand to hand. While guilds in cities formalized rules, rural communities relied on apprenticeships that began without declarations, just shared tools, shared food, shared time. You nod. Invite the stranger in. Offer him tea and a wedge of something you made last spring that aged into accidental brilliance. You ask him to describe the cheese he brought. He tells you it was made in a clay urn lined with elderflower leaves, that it curdled slowly like it was shy, that he doesn't know if it's good. You taste it. It's bright, uneven, alive. "It's not good," you say, smiling. "It's yours, quirky tidbit." There's an old Welsh riddle. "I speak without tongue, travel without feet, and fill your belly with silence. What am I?" The answer is cheese. Always cheese. And always more than cheese. You tell him about the spiral, the kiln, the three-dot triangle. He listens like someone hearing folklore and feeling it root into truth. He leaves with a wedge of your nettled sheep blend and your notes on how to cure in a hearth-warm room. You leave him with one instruction: make it yours, but remember where it came from. That night, as you clean your tools, Mably headbutts your shin, probably in hunger, possibly in pride. You look over your shelf of wheels, some marked, some plain. Some sent, some never will be. You don't need to send another cheese. You already have, but you do anyway, wrapped in wax bark, banded in wool string. No name, no note, just left in the hollow near the old chapel where moss gathers and stories rest. Because someone, someday, will find it. Historians still argue whether these traditions were fact or fable, whether the cheese circles ever existed, whether mystery wheels traveled across regions guided only by flavor. You know better. In your ledger you write, "She began a circle. He brought it here." My wheel replied, "The story continues." And then softly on a new page, "Legacy is lactose-bound. Truth is brined, but the best wheels roll forward." You set your quill down, blow out the candle. Sit in the dark with the scent of sage and smoke still curling in the air. And somewhere beyond your little gate, someone is unwrapping a cheese, tasting a story. And thinking of you. The day begins with thunder. Not the sky kind, though the clouds are low and woolly, but the kind that rumbles from the ground up, hooves, carts, and shouting. You peek out your window and see something you haven't in years. A convoy. 3 carts, 12 people, and a banner strung awkwardly between 2 broomsticks. The lettering is smudged but unmistakable. Gathering of the Great Rhines. You blink. Once, twice, then groan softly. You'd heard rumors, of course, that the big villages were getting ideas, that someone from Lanhiddle had proposed a festival. A full-scale, open-air celebration of Welsh cheesemaking traditions, with contests, cookfires, bardic recitals, and, God's help you, judges. Now they're here, and one of them is walking toward your gate. You open the door before they can knock. "You're the one with the ghost cheese, right?" the man asks, adjusting a scroll case slung across his chest. "The note writer." "The cheddar whisperer." You raise an eyebrow. "I suppose that depends who's asking." He beams. "Name's Bryken. I'm organizing the tasting ring. We'd be honored if you entered a wheel." Mainstream historical fact. Medieval Wales hosted local fairs where cheesemakers might showcase their work, but most food festivals, as we think of them today, were humble, informal, and seasonal, linked to religious feasts, harvests, or spring blessings. That said, bardic records reference rare, prestigious events like Fair I Cause, the cheese fair, where wheels were judged by local elders, and the winner received a carved ladle, a goat fleece, and the right to host next year's feast. You glance at your shelves. You weren't planning to compete. You've always seen cheese as communication, not conquest. But then again, if the story is still being written, maybe it needs to be read out loud now and then. You tell Bryken you'll enter. "Just one wheel. You pick it that evening, not the prettiest one. Not the most exotic. A quiet blend, goat and sheep wrapped in mint, cured in time smoke, marked only with your new symbol, the single slashed crescent. You name it. Cause Towel, the quiet cheese. The festival begins the next morning. Tents flap in the breeze. Children chase chickens between fire pits. Someone tries to roast a cheese wheel and fails dramatically. A bard recites a dramatic poem about the curse of the split rind, which involves 3 wronged sisters, a lost dowry, and some extremely slanderous dairy metaphors. Your cheese is displayed on a wooden slab beneath a cloth awning. No pitch, no explanation. Just you sitting nearby, occasionally sipping watered cider and trying to ignore the man with a feathered hat shouting, "Try my triple fermented triple cream." Eventually, the judges arrive. They're a curious bunch. An abbess with ash-streaked robes, a barrel-chested blacksmith who chews with concentration, and, of course, Madeline, who must have nominated herself at the last minute. She winks at you with a sprig of parsley stuck in her hair. They taste. They pause. They taste again. No speeches, no fanfare, but the blacksmith pats your shoulder on the way out. "That one," he says, "tastes like something I forgot I needed." You win 3rd place, which is perfect. First goes to a cheese so blue it looks like a religious vision. Second goes to a salted butter cheese shaped like a sleeping badger, but your wheel, yours is eaten first. People keep coming back for more. They ask what's in it, who you trained under. Whether you plan to start a school, you shrug, smile, cut another slice. You tell them the story, briefly, carefully. Not about the truth cheese, not about the circle. Just this: "I once made cheese for silence." Then someone replied. Quirky tidbit? In some Welsh folktales, the 3rd place winner in village contests was considered the true victor. The first was for flash, the second for favor, but the third, that one was chosen by fate. One tale tells of a woman who placed 3rd at a harvest fair and found the love of her life because of it. Another mentions a 3rd place cheese so good it was mistaken for sacred bread during a poorly lit ceremony. As the festival winds down and the fires burn low, you sit by your tent, legs outstretched, nibbling a spare wedge of Cause Towel. Linos appears beside you, holding 2 clay cups of warm mead. "You told them just enough," she says, sipping, "and left the rest for those who taste properly." You clink cups. In your ledger, you write, "Entered cheese into fair, 1/3. Felt first." Then, on a new page, "Told a story in rind. People listened. The stars are clear that night. Your goats, tethered under a lean-to, are asleep. The festival will pack up tomorrow. The field will return to grass. But your wheel, your story, is out there now. Rolling forward, quiet, unstoppable. The fair has gone. The banners are folded, the tents rolled up, the last wheels bartered and bundled onto carts, and yet the scent of roasted leeks and soft, moldy rind seems to linger on the wind days after. You walk your usual paths, down to the stream, over the rise, along the crumbled stone fence, and everything feels the same, but altered. Your world is wider now, and so too are the stories. You've started receiving letters, real ones, ink, parchment, seals bearing symbols you've never seen, some marked with vines, some with spoons, one with a sheep doing what appears to be a cartwheel. Each letter is from someone who tasted your cheese at the fair. One comes from a baker in the south who wants to try pairing your rind with rye crust. Another from a beekeeper who insists his hives hum differently when your cheese is near. A third from a young woman who writes simply, "I never knew food could feel like being understood." Mainstream historical fact. While most cheesemakers in medieval Wales relied on foot traffic and market chatter, some did correspond, especially those on trade routes. Letters were delivered slowly, folded with dried herbs or waxed flower petals, meant to keep the parchment from absorbing the smells of less charming parcels, like fish guts or sheep dung. Many included drawings of wheels, presses, or storage cellars, cheesemonger blueprints, essentially. You reply when you can. Sometimes with words, sometimes with cheese. You send a wheel to the beekeeper wrapped in mint and elderflower. To the baker, you send a smoked wedge tied with a length of nettle rope. To the young woman, you send nothing, just a note. It can, and it should. You're curing more than ever now. You've added a third shelf to your cellar, repaired the cracked corner with river stones and goat glue. There's a rhythm to it all. Morning curd, afternoon stirring, evening rinds and records. It's not glamorous, but it feels like music. One evening you receive a package. It's not marked, no name, just wrapped in faded linen and tied with a ribbon that smells faintly of blackberry leaf. Inside, a single cheese wheel, large, heavy. Aged long and well, rind dark as storm wood, pressed into the surface, unmistakable, the spiral. Your old friend, quirky tidbit? In bardic tradition, spirals represented cycles, birth, death, rebirth. But among cheesemakers, it meant you weren't done yet. You cut into it. It's sharp, smooth, deep, like a story you once told but forgot the ending to. Inside the cloth, a note. I see you found your voice. Here's a verse of mine. No need to answer. Just know, I'm still listening. You stare at it for a long time. And that night, as you stir your latest batch, an experimental blue with fennel seeds and ash, you hum, not a lullaby, not a chant. A tune that sounds like cheese aging in darkness, like smoke on wool, like memory held in rind. Historians still argue whether these traditions survive, if anyone really speaks through cheese anymore, or if modern taste has buried the quiet conversations beneath salt and showmanship. But here, in your little cottage with its creaking beams and skeptical goats, you know better. The spiral never ended. It only widened. In your ledger, you write, "They answered again." No call this time, just presence, the best kind. You press your wheel gently, cover it with cloth, and place it on the shelf beside your first ever wedge. The one that cracked in the middle, but never fell apart. You smile, breathe. Turn out the lamp, and in the dark, the cellar hums. The rain comes soft at first, gentle sprinkles tapping on your shutters like polite guests, then heavier, steady, relentless. For 3 days it drums down on your roof, seeps into the edges of your cellar, and turns the goat path into something resembling porridge. You don't mind. Rain means slower mornings, deeper stirs, and more time for thinking. And tonight, you're making a farewell cheese, not because anyone's leaving, but because something is shifting. You can feel it in your bones, in the quiet around the fire, in the way your cheese knife no longer hesitates before slicing. You've told the story. Now you're simply living it. You begin the new wheel with sheep's milk and dried rose hips, a touch of salt pulled from sea trade, a sprinkle of juniper ash, and crushed nettle seeds. It's a strange combination, one you'd never have dared a year ago. But now, you trust your hands. Mainstream historical fact? Farewell wheels were real, though rare, crafted not for grief, but gratitude. Made when a cheesemaker retired, when an apprentice set off, or when someone passed through town who made a mark too strong to ignore. They were aged just long enough to hold their shape, and given wrapped in linen, no explanation, just a nod. This cheese is for no one and everyone. You won't trade it, won't label it. You'll cure it for a season, and then eat it by yourself beside a fire, maybe with mead. Maybe with silence. You wrap it in rosemary sprigs and birch bark and mark it with a crescent line, a nod to where your story bent and shifted. That night, you sit beside your fire with your ledger and begin reading backward. Ghost cheese stolen. 3 replies. 1 goodbye. Festival, 3rd place. Tasted like being heard. Quiet wheel sent to the beekeeper. You trace each line with your finger like it's a trail on a map. You smile, occasionally sniffle. You forget how many wheels pass through your hands. How many hours you spent stirring, pressing, wrapping, wondering. And yet, here you are, still stirring. Still wondering. Quirky tidbit? There's a saying in old cheesemaker lore. The rind remembers. Not just the flavor, but the feeling. The weather when it was made, the hand that held it, the silence after a laugh. It's why some cheesemakers swore their best wheels were made when the heart was still and the mind soft, like curds, just before the press. You close the ledger, place it gently on your windowsill, just beneath the candle. And then you hear something, a knock, not at the door. Not at the gate, at the cellar hatch. You open it slowly, half expecting a goat, maybe wind. Instead, wrapped in wax paper, dry despite the rain, is a small wedge. Pressed into the surface, a leaf, the same one you once marked your farewell cheese with. You laugh, not loud, not shocked. Just warm. You bring it inside, set it next to your own wheel. They look almost like siblings. In your ledger you write, 1 last answer, no words needed. Then 1 more note. The cheese speaks. Always, whether we taste it or not. You turn off the lantern, listen to the rain. Let the world go soft, the fire crackles, the goats sigh. The shelves are full, and in the corner of your mind, something sings. A spiral, a circle. A story pressed into rind and time. The next morning the rain has stopped. The world smells like moss and smoke and beginnings. The grass is impossibly green. The sky, a pale blue sheet, stretched smooth as linen over the hills. Your goats blink lazily in the sun, tails flicking with the slow confidence of creatures who've never once worried about legacy. You step outside with your morning mug, herbal tea infused with mint and whatever leaf you plucked in the dark last night, and feel something different settle into your bones. Stillness, not the silence of waiting, the peace of having spoken. You walk the long way around the property, past the blackberry thicket, the old nettle patch, and that stubborn rock that's slowly swallowing your fence post. The earth squishes pleasantly beneath your boots. Every few paces, you think about turning back. But something urges you onward. At the far edge of your pasture, where the land slumps into a shallow valley, you find a patch of mushrooms, pale, clustering in a gentle spiral. You crouch down, smile, and whisper to no one. Good taste never really leaves, does it? You pluck one for your tea and leave the rest. Always leave the rest. Back in your cottage, the cellar welcomes you like an old friend. Cool, steady, quietly alive. You check your wheels, some firming, some still weeping. One has grown a mold that looks suspiciously like the profile of Madeline squinting. You'll deal with that tomorrow. For now, you pull out the farewell wheel, the one you wrapped in birch and rosemary. You unwrap it slowly, like unrolling a memory. You slice it and you eat. Mainstream historical fact. In many food traditions, the first and last bite was sacred, meant to honor not just the process, but the self. The cheesemaker's share was often the smallest, but the most potent. Aged longer, cut cleaner, wrapped with intention. Eating it marked the end of one circle and the readiness to begin another. Your wheel tastes like patience, like sharp warmth and quiet endings, like 1,000 mornings stirring curds while the world outside stumbled forward, oblivious to the rituals happening in your little stone cellar. You lean back in your chair, let the flavor linger. The ledger sits open beside you, a blank page waiting. You don't rush to write, because this is the pause, the long exhale, the final slice. Quirky tidbit? Among some old Welsh makers, it was tradition to whisper a blessing over the last bite of a great wheel. Not for protection, but continuation. The words were rarely written down, but often included wishes for new hands, new milk, new stories. You say your own blessing aloud. May the rind crack gently. May the curds find comfort. May the next taste always carry a little of this one. Outside, the breeze picks up. A hawk cries. The grass bends, listening. In your heart, you know there will be more cheese, or bare mornings. More little wheels born in quiet, aged in silence, shared in mystery. But this story, this one is done. You close the ledger, tuck it under your arm, and walk it to the cellar shelf where it belongs. Not for safekeeping, but for rest. The fire crackles. The tea cools, the goats mumble in their sleep, and the cheese. The cheese remembers everything. So now, let's slow everything down. You've walked the damp paths. You've stirred the milk. You've pressed and aged and sliced and waited. You've whispered messages in rind and listened for answers in curd. The spiral turned, and you followed. And now, as your eyelids grow heavier, I want you to picture a cool cellar beneath a stone cottage, the kind where the air always smells of thyme and faint goat, and the shelves creak with stories quietly aging. You are there now. Your hands are dusted with flour. Your apron smells faintly of smoke. In your arms, a wheel, wrapped, marked, waiting. You place it gently on the shelf beside all the others. Some sent, some never opened, some still waiting to be tasted. You sit down on the cool floor. Let your back rest against the stone wall. Let the quiet settle in. No more lists. No more recipes, no more messages, just silence. Just the steady hum of flavor sleeping. Outside, the sun dips low. The hills turn gold, then gray. The goats stop rustling. Even the wind seems to sigh and still. You close your eyes. Feel the weight of your last cheese in your palm. And as your breathing deepens, remember, even in rest, stories linger. And the best ones, you can taste them long after they're gone. Sweet dreams.